the Senators of the Republic of the Philippines.
Hi, guys. The 41st session of the Senate, the first regular session of the 19th Congress is hereby called to order. Our distinguished colleague, Senator Grace Poe, will lead the chamber in prayer.
Sa ngalan ng Ama, ng Anak, ng Espiritu Santo. Amen. Panginoon, ipagkaloob mo po sa amin ang hangad naming kapayapaan ng kalooban. Payapain mo po ang aming puso't isip ng aming mga mamamayan. Alisin mo po ang agam-agam at takot ng aming mga kababayan. Bigyan mo po ang lahat ng seguridad ng pagkaing maisusubo at tahanang mapapagkanlungan. Ipag-adya mo po kami mula sa kapahamakan at karamdaman. Pagpalain mo po ang aming mga pinuno ng aming bansa upang magamit namin ang batas at pulisiya sa pag-aangat ng kalagayan ng aming mga kababayan, sa pagbibigay sa bawat isa ng buhay na may dignidad, sa paglikha ng isang Pilipinas na kasiya-siya sa iyong mga mata. Amen.
Amen. The Secretary may please call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senator Angara, Senator Binay, Senator Cayetano Alan, Senator Cayetano Pia, Senator De La Rosa, Senator Ejercito, Senator Escudero, Senator Estrada, Senator Gatchalian, Senator Go, Senator Ontiveros, Senator Lapid, Senator Ligarda, Senator Marcos, Senator Padilla, Senator Pimentel, Senator Poe, Senator Revilla, Senator Tolentino, Senator Tulfo, Senator Villanueva, Senator Villar Cynthia, Senator Villar Mark, the Senate President.
We're absent. With 21 members present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, before we proceed with the reference of business, may I be allowed to acknowledge some guests from the gallery, guests of our dear colleague, Senator Bongo, Mayor Anamel Ami Olegario of Ipil, Zamboanga, Sibugay, and guest of this representation, Congressman Roy Loyola of Cavite, Mr. President, is present here today.
Yes, our dear friend, former member of the Commission on Appointments, Congressman Loyola, and all the guests mentioned by the Majority Floor Leader. Welcome to your Senate, gentlemen and ladies. Welcome to your Senate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I now move that we proceed with the reference of business.
There being no objection, Secretary, please proceed with the reference of business.
Bills on first reading. Senate number 1662, emancipating agrarian reform beneficiaries from the debt burden by condoning unpaid amortizations and interest of agricultural lands awarded in other agrarian reform programs. Appropriate funds therefore and for other purposes. Senator Marcos.
To the Committees on Agriculture and Finance.
1663, penalizing fintech crime, providing penalties therefore and for other purposes. Senator Marcos.
To the Committees on Banks and Financial Institutions, Justice, Human Rights, and Finance.
1664, penalizing persons who shall commit prohibited acts during a state of public health emergency and for other purposes. Senator Marcos.
To the Committee on Justice and Human Rights.
1665, declaring the 9th of August as National Indigenous Peoples Day, a special non-working holiday, and the month of August as National Indigenous Peoples Month. Senator Marcos.
To the Committees on Constitutional Amendments and Cultural Communities and Muslim Affairs.
1666, strengthening the PCIC, repealing for the purpose PD 1467, as amended by PD 1733 and RA 8175 by Senator Marcos.
To the Committees on Government Corporations, Agriculture, Food, Waste and Means and Finance.
1667, establishing the Philippine National Public Park System and appropriating funds therefore. Senator Villar M.
To the Committees on Tourism, Civil Service, Ways and Means and Finance.
1668, providing for educational assistance to children and dependents of farmers and fisher folks, providing funds therefore and for other purposes, Senator Villar M.
To the Committees on Basic Education, Agriculture, Food, and Finance.
1669, an act to provide early youth suicide intervention and prevention expansion, Senator Villar M.
Committees on Youth, Health and Demography, and Finance.
1670, establishing the Maharlika Investment Fund, providing for the management, investment, and use of the proceeds of the fund and for other purposes, Senator Villar M.
To the Committees on Banks, Financial Institutions, Government Corporations, Ways and Means, and Finance.
1671, instituting the Magna Carta of Filipino Seafarers, Senator Villar M.
To the Committee on Migrant Workers.
1672, granting free college entrance examinations to the underprivileged public senior high school graduating students and graduates belonging to the top 15% of their graduating class for admission in private higher education institutions, Senator Villar M.
Committees on Higher Technical and Vocational Education, Basic Education.
1673, an act to establish the Philippine Coast Guard Academy, allocating funds therefore and for other purposes, Senator Villar M.
To the Committees on Public Service, National Defense, and Finance.
1674, proclaiming Firefighters Recognition Day, Senator Villar M.
To the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs.
1675, enhancing accessibility in the voting of senior citizens, persons with disabilities, pregnant women, and indigenous people, amending for the purpose RA 10366, providing funds therefore and for other purposes, Senator Villar M.
To the Committees on Electoral Reforms, Social Justice, and Finance.
1676, promoting and supporting the development and growth of the Philippine film industry, creating for this purpose the Philippine Film Commission, defining its powers and functions, and for other purposes, Senator Villar M.
To the Committees on Public Information, Mass Media, Ways and Means, and Finance.
1677, granting distinctive honors and privileges to national athletes, creating a national endowment fund for sports heroes and appropriating funds therefore, Senator Villar M.
To the Committees on Sports, Ways and Means, and Finance.
1678, expanding the use of the Legal Assistance Fund, amending for the purpose Section 26 of RA 8042, as amended by Senator Ejercito.
To the Committee on Migrant Workers.
1679, mandating private higher education institutions to waive the college entrance examination fees to underprivileged graduating high school students, Senator Lapid.
Committees on Higher Technical Vocational Education, Basic Education.
1680, promoting Philippine indigenous and traditional writing systems and providing for their protection, preservation, and conservation, Senator Lapid.
To the Committee on Culture and Arts.
1681, an act to designate the second day of July of every year a special non-working holiday in the city of Pasig, to be known as the Araw ng Pasig, Senator Lapid.
To the Committee on Local Government.
1682, an act to improve and to promote quality delivery of health services in barangays, enacting the Barangay Health Workers and Services Reform Act of 2023, Senator Tulfo.
To the Committees on Health and Demography, Local Government, and Finance.
1683, declaring an effective official ipso facto resign from his elective office upon the filing of a certificate of candidacy, Senator Tulfo.
To the Committee on Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation.
1684, mandating the use of a health rating system on the labels of packaged food products, Senator Tulfo.
To the Committees on Health, Demography, Trade, Commerce.
1685, revitalizing the salt industry of the Philippines, amending for the purpose RA 8172 and for other purposes, Senator Tulfo.
To the Committees on Agriculture, Trade, and Finance.
1686, mandating the full accounting of all disaster relief or donations received by the Philippine government for natural and human-induced calamities, Senator Tulfo.
To the Committee on Finance.
1687, instituting strategies to address and mitigate the damage caused by weather aberrations and natural disasters where excessive rainwater cause massive flooding that destroy property, lives, and infrastructure, but utilizing the same to remedy problems due to lack of it, to lessen the impact of droughts, typhoons, earthquakes, strengthen the ability of government to reduce and control disaster attributable to rainwater and for other purposes, Senator Tulfo.
To the Committees on Public Works and Finance.
1688, amending certain provisions of RA 10845 and for other purposes, Senator Ejercito.
To the Committees on Agriculture, Food and Agrarian Reform, Justice, Human Rights.
1689, establishing the job placement offices in public high schools to provide career services to the youth, Senator Tulfo.
To the Committees on Labor and Employment, Basic Education, Finance.
1690, declaring the Panawan Island and its surrounding areas situated in southern Leyte as protected seascape, pursuant to RA 11038, Senator Villar C.
To the Committees on Environment, and Finance.
1691, declaring a parcel of land located in San Francisco, Quezon, a protected area with the category of protected landscape under the National Integrated Protected Area System to be referred to as the San Francisco Protected Landscape, providing for its management and appropriating funds therefore. Senator Villar C.
To the Committees on Environment and Finance.
1692, providing for the Magna Carta for the Public Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Workers. Senator Tulfo.
To the Committees on National Defense, Civil Service, and Finance.
1693, providing enhanced protection, security, and benefits for media workers. Senator Tulfo.
To the Committees on Labor and Employment and Public Information Mass Media.
1694, an act to support research and development of new industrial processes and technologies that optimize energy efficiency and environmental performance, utilize diverse sources of energy, and increase economic competitiveness. Senator Tulfo.
To the Committees on Energy, Science and Technology, and Finance.
1695, granting free funeral services to poor families nationwide, appropriating funds and for other purposes. Senator Tulfo.
To the Committees on Social Justice and Finance.
1696, providing for a Magna Carta for barangay officials, personnel, and volunteer workers and for other purposes. Senator Tulfo.
To the Committee on Local Government.
1697, declaring the 3 nautical miles surrounding the Kalayaan Island Group and Scarborough Shoal in the West Philippine Sea as marine protected area under RA 7586 as amended by RA 11038 by Senator Tulfo.
To the Committee on Environment, Natural Resources, and Finance.
1698, providing for bicycle rides, creation of local bikeways office, establishing infrastructure in relation thereto and for other purposes. Senator Tulfo.
Committees on Public Services and Public Works.
1699, establishing a College of Medicine in the Benguet State University in La Trinidad, Benguet, to be known as the Benguet State University College of Medicine. Appropriating funds therefore. Senator Tulfo.
To the Committees on Higher Technical Vocational Education, Ways and Means of Finance.
1700, providing accessibility of persons with disabilities to the built environment, transportation, information and communication technology, and other facilities and services open or provided to the public, amending for the purpose BP 344 by Senator Tulfo.
To the Committees on Social Justice and Finance.
1701, requiring critical information infrastructure institutions to adopt and implement adequate measures to protect their information and communications technology, ICT systems, and infrastructure. Senator Tulfo.
Committees on Science and Technology and Finance.
1702, mandating the establishment of fisher folk resettlement areas by the DA, Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development, and local government units, amending for the purpose Section 108 of RA 8550 as amended by RA 10654. Senator Tulfo.
To the Committees on Agriculture, Urban Planning, and Housing.
1703, providing for the grant of security of tenure for all casual and contractual employees of the government who have rendered the prescribed length of service and for other purposes. Senator Revilla Jr.
To the Committee on Civil Service.
1704, mandating construction of person with disabilities infrastructure-friendly facilities in all SUCs, appropriating funds therefore for other purposes. Senator Villar M.
To the Committees on Higher Technical Vocational Education, Public Works, and Finance.
1705, increasing the service incentive leave of employees, amending for the purpose Article 95 of PD 442 by Senator Go.
To the Committees on Labor and Employment, Human Resource Development.
1706, adjusting the monthly pension and disability benefits of retirees of the Department of Foreign Affairs. Senator Go.
To the Committee on Government Corporations, Foreign Relations, and Finance.
1707, fully recognizing the services of social workers by ensuring competitive remuneration and compensation packages, appropriating funds therefore. Senator Go.
To the Committees on Civil Service, Social Justice, and Finance.
1708, mandating private higher education institutions to waive the college entrance examination fees to underprivileged graduating high school students and high school graduates belonging to the top 10 of their graduating class. Senator Go.
To the Committees on Higher Technical Vocational Education, Basic Education.
1709, amending RA 10121 for the purpose of granting hazard pay to disaster response personnel during state of calamity. Senator Go.
To the Committees on National Defense and Ways and Means.
1710, enabling banks to expand service delivery channels through cash agents and providing guidelines therefore. Senator Marcos.
To the Committees on Banks and Financial Institutions.
1711, an act to encourage good Samaritans to provide reasonable assistance during an emergency by protecting them from liability. Senator Marcos.
To the Committees on Social Justice and Justice and Human Rights.
1712, strengthening the Philippine Retirement Authority, expanding its powers and for other purposes. Senator Marcos.
To the Committees on Government Corporations, Tourism, Ways and Means, and Finance. There's additional reference. Please proceed.
Additional reference of business. Messages from the House of Representatives. Letter from the House informing the Senate that on 12 December 2022, it passed the following House bills in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. House number 3917, amending sections 3 and 4 of RA 10845, otherwise known as the Anti-Agricultural Smuggling Act of 2016, and for other purposes.
Referred to Committees on Agriculture, Justice, Human Rights, Ways and Means.
4337, declaring the province of Ilocos Norte as the garlic capital of the Philippines.
To the Committees on Agriculture and Food.
6416, strengthening the mental health services of state universities and colleges and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Higher Technical Vocational Education, Health and Demography, and Finance.
6468, establishing a green procurement program for all branches of government.
To the Committees on Sustainable Development Goals and Finance.
6473, establishing the Philippine Entrepreneurs Academy and appropriating funds therefore.
To Committees on Higher Technical Vocational Education, Trade and Commerce, Ways and Means, and Finance.
6483, allowing college students with unpaid tuition and other school fees to take the periodic and final examinations on good cause and justifiable grounds.
To the Committees on Higher Technical Vocational Education, Basic Education.
6524, further extending the period of implementation of the ASAP, amending for the purpose RA 8178 as amended by RA numbers 9496, 10848, and 11203, and for other purposes.
To the Committees on Agriculture, Ways and Means, and Finance.
House number 4, providing protection to consumers and merchants engaged in internet transactions, creating for the purpose the Electronic Commerce Bureau and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Trade and Commerce and Finance.
House number 6, promoting open access in data transmission and providing additional powers to the National Telecommunications Commission.
To the Committees on Science and Technology and Public Services.
6336, emancipating agrarian reform beneficiaries from the financial burden by condoning unpaid amortizations and interest and exempting payment of estate tax on agricultural lands awarded under the CARP.
To the Committees on Agriculture, Ways and Means, and Finance.
6444, regulating the use of treatment technology for municipal and hazardous waste, repealing for the purpose Section 20 of RA 8749.
To the Committees on Environment, Natural Resources, and Ways and Means.
6509, providing free legal assistance to any officer or uniformed personnel of the AFP, BFP, BJMP, the Philippine Coast Guard, and the PNP facing any charge before the prosecutor's office, court, or any competent body arising from an incident related to the performance of official duty, appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on National Defense, Public Order, and Finance.
6510, providing for a new passport law, repealing for the purpose RA number 8239.
To the Committee on Foreign Relations.
6517, further strengthening professionalism and promoting the continuity of policies and modernization initiatives in the AFP.
To the Committees on National Defense and Security in Government Corporations.
6518, creating the Health Emergency Auxiliary Reinforcement Team under the DOH and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Health and Demography, Local Government, and Finance.
6522, creating the Philippine Centers for Disease Prevention and Control, defining their powers and functions, appropriating funds therefore.
Committees on Health and Demography, Ways and Means, and Finance.
6523, providing for a revised national apprenticeship program, repealing for the purpose chapters 1 and 2 of Title 2, Book 2 of PD 442 as amended.
To the Committee on Labor and Employment.
6527, providing for the enabling environment to foster the growth of public-private partnerships for infrastructure and other development projects.
To the Committees on Public Works, Economic Affairs, Ways and Means, and Finance.
6557, providing for the Magna Carta of Barangay Health Workers.
To the Committees on Health, Demography, Local Government, Ways and Means, and Finance.
6558, instituting reforms in real property valuation and assessment in the Philippines, reorganizing the Bureau of Local Government Finance, and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Ways and Means, Local Government, and Finance.
House number 24, converting and expanding the Leyte Industrial Development Estate into the Leyte Ecological Industrial Zone, creating for the purpose the Leyte Ecological Industrial Zone Authority and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees,
That's all.
To the Committees on Economic Affairs, Environment, Natural Resources, Ways and Means, and Finance.
6511, creating the Eastern Visayas Development Authority, defining its powers and functions and providing funds therefore.
To the Committees on Government Corporations, Economic Affairs, and Finance.
Letter from the House informing the Senate that on 13 December 2022, it passed the following House bills in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. House number 6358, declaring Barangay Kapatagan, Indigos, Davao del Sur, an ecotourism destination.
To the Committees on Tourism, Environment, and Finance.
6474, declaring Barangay San Miguel in Echage, Isabela an ecotourism zone.
To the Committees on Tourism, Environment, and Finance.
6475, declaring the Paraiso T. Caribquib located in Sitio Daramwangan, Barangay Caribquib, Municipality of Bana, Province of Ilocos Norte, an ecotourism destination.
Committees on Tourism, Environment, and Finance.
428, declaring certain portions of the Welfareville property located in Mandaluyong open for disposition to bona fide residents without public bidding and for other purposes.
To the Committees on Environment, Natural Resources, Social Justice, and Finance.
6156, creating a barangay in the municipality of Tanay, province of Rizal, to be known as Barangay Madilay-Dilay.
To the Committees on Local Government and Electoral Reforms.
6158, declaring October 27 of every year special non-working holiday in the province of Sarangani in recognition of the unique contribution of the indigenous peoples of Sarangani to the rich and diverse cultural heritage of the Philippines.
To the Committee on Local Government.
6337, establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in the city of Baybay, Leyte, and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committee on Agriculture, Food, and Finance.
Letter from the House informing the Senate that on 15 November 2022, it passed the following House bills in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. House Number 1, providing for government financial institutions unified initiatives to distress enterprises for economic recovery.
To the Committees on Banks and Financial Institutions, Government Corporations, and Finance.
6687, instituting a national citizen service training program in all public and private tertiary education institutions, repealing for the purpose RA 9163 and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Higher Technical Vocational Education, National Defense, and Finance.
6608, establishing the Maharlika Investment Fund, providing for the management, investment, and use of the proceeds of the fund and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Banks, Financial Institutions, Government Corporations, Ways and Means of Finance.
Letter from the House informing the Senate that on 13 December 2022, it adopted House Concurrent Resolution Number 6, concurrent resolution establishing the Philippine Congress Bangsamoro Parliament Forum as provided under Article 6, Section 3 of RA 11054, otherwise known as the Organic Law for the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate.
To the Archives.
Letter from the House informing the Senate that on 13 December 2022, it adopted Senate Concurrent Resolution Number 5 as an amendment to House Concurrent Resolution Number 6 entitled Concurrent Resolution Establishing the Philippine Congress Bangsamoro Parliament Forum as provided under Article 6, Section 3 of RA 11054.
To the Archives.
Communications, letter from the Office of the President dated 14 December 2022, addressed to Speaker Ferdinand Martin G. Romualdez of the House of Representatives, copy furnished Senate President Juan Miguel F. Zubiri, certifying to the necessity of the immediate enactment of House Number 6687, instituting a national citizen service training program in all public and private tertiary education institutions, repealing for the purpose RA 9163, and appropriating funds therefore. And House Number 6608, establishing the Maharlika Investment Fund, providing for the management, investment, and use of the proceeds of the fund and appropriating funds therefore, pursuant to the provisions of Article 6, Section 26, Paragraph 2 of the 1987 Constitution.
Referred to the Committee on Rules, Majority Leader.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. President, before we proceed, Mr. President, we would like to also acknowledge the Sangguniang Bayan of Carmona, headed by Vice Mayor Cesar, and Sangguniang Bayan members. Also with us, guest of Senator Marcos, Mayor Aimee de Guzman of Santo Domingo, Nueva Ecija. And also with us, Mr. President, guest of Senator J.V. Ercito, Sir Erden Eruk, 15-time Guinness World Record to complete an entirely solo and entirely human-powered circumnavigation of the Earth using his bicycle and boat. He is with us today, Mr. President.
We'd like to welcome all the guests today in the Senate. Welcome to your Senate. And to the Guinness Book of World Records, we are honored to have you with us, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, at this juncture and with the permission of the body, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 3968 under Committee Report number 12. This is the Charter of the City of Carmona.
There being no objection to the motion of the Majority Floor Leader, the resumption of consideration of House Bill number 3968 is in order.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The parliamentary status, Mr. President, of the measure is that we close the period of interpellations and debate, and I am now moving to open the period of committee amendments and recognize the chairperson of the Committee on Local Government, Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
Our distinguished colleague, Senator J.V. Ercito, the chairperson of the Committee on Local Governments, is recognized.
Thank you, Majority Leader. Thank you, Mr. President. In accordance to Rule number 24, Section 82, Paragraph 2 of the Rules of the Senate, with the consent of the body, I move that we amend the bill in the nature of a substitute by striking out all the text after the enacting law clause and insert the language or text contained in the substitute bill as distributed earlier today with a copy thereof filed with our Bills and Index Service. Mr. President, we would like to thank also our colleagues for their input, especially the Senate Minority Leader, for helping us craft and improve the House bill. So with that, Sir President, I stand corrected. Rule 29 of Section 82, Mr. President. So with that, Mr. President, I so move to close the period of.
We'll do that, Mr. President. But before that, Mr. President, we'd like to put on record that our distinguished colleague, Senator Bongo, would like to be made co-sponsor of this House Bill 3968. So move, Mr. President.
So let's approve move the amendment. Let's approve the
amendments.
amendment, and then we can accept
Yes,
the co-sponsors. So there being no objection to the
The amendments,
proposal
Mr. President.
of Senator JV, the motion. There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as earlier mentioned, Senator Bongo would like to be made co-sponsor of House Bill number 3968.
Can this representation also be
Yes,
made
and
co-sponsor?
also Senator Bato de la Rosa, Senator Cynthia Villar, I think, especially I have to say Senator Jingo Estrada, Mr. President.
Well, it would have
All.
been proper if we do the amendments first and then we
that
accept
later.
all these sponsorships
Thank you,
from
Mr.
all our
President.
colleagues.
I'm sorry, I was confused.
Even
because
I
I
was
was just given this,
excited to be co-sponsor.
Yes, we will do that later, Mr. President.
So
Let
let's
me make the proper motion, Mr. President. With no other amendments, I move to close the period of amendments.
There being no objection to the motion of the Majority Floor Leader, the period of amendments is hereby closed.
So, Mr. President, I move that we open the period of individual amendments, if there are any from our colleagues, Mr. President. There being none, I move that we close the period of individual amendments. So
There
moved,
being
Mr.
no
President.
objection to the motion, the period of individual amendments is closed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with that, I move to approve on second reading House Bill number 3968 as amended.
The motion is to approve House Bill number 3968. There being no objection, the motion is approved on second reading. The measure is approved on second
Thank you,
reading.
Mr. President. And at this
Congratulations to the
and at
men
this-
and women of Carmona.
And at this juncture, Mr. President, I move that all members of the Senate
Be made co-sponsors.
be made co-sponsors, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion is approved. May I ask for a minute suspension,
Yes,
Majority
Mr.
Leader?
President, but before we
So-
suspend, Mr. President, may I just acknowledge the presence of Congresswoman Maria Carmen Zamora, 1st District of Davao de Oro, Vice Governor J.V. Tiron Uy of Davao de Oro, and Vice Governor Oyo Uy of Davao del Norte. Thank you, Mr.
Yes.
President.
Welcome to your Senate. May silingan sa Mindanao. 1 minute suspension.
Mr. President, at this juncture, may we acknowledge and welcome some guests from the gallery. We have here with us, Mr. President, Her Excellency HKU, Australian Ambassador to the Philippines. We would like to acknowledge her presence, Mr. President.
To the ambassador, you're very welcome to the Philippine Senate. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we also have with us the Basilan State University Public Administration students headed by Dr. Nasser Salayin. We welcome them to the Senate.
Welcome to the Philippine Senate. And we'd like to remind the Majority Leader, we did not suspend consideration of the bill on Carmona. So let's suspend that first, Your Honor.
Yes, Mr. President, I move for the previous question to suspend consideration of House Bill number 3968. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, House Bill 3968 is hereby suspended from consideration. My apologies, we were all excited to greet the constituents of Carmona.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, at this juncture and with the permission of the body, I move that we proceed with the privileged speech and recognize the distinguished lady from the city of Taguig and Pateros, Senator Pia Cayetano, to deliver her speech.
The distinguished lady senator from the city of Taguig and the municipality of Pateros and the Republic of the Philippines, Senator Pia Cayetano, is recognized.
A minute suspension. Can I just
Session
drink some
suspended for
water?
a minute.
Sorry.
Mr. President, I rise today on a matter of personal and collective privilege. On 30 January 2020, the World Health Organization announced COVID-19 as a public health emergency. I'll quickly walk through this history to emphasize the importance of the facts that I'd like to bring up today. On 16 March 2020, President Rodrigo Duterte placed the entire Philippines under a state of calamity through Proclamation number 929, dated for a period of 6 months. The COVID-19 state of calamity has been extended several times. Proclamation number 1021 on 16 September 2020, Proclamation number 1218 on 10 September 2021, and Proclamation number 57 on 12 September 2022. The Philippines COVID-19 state of calamity has lapsed on the 31st of December 2022. So it has lapsed. The DOH had, previous to this lapse, been had made statements and submitted an official request to President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. to consider the further extension of the COVID-19 state of calamity to ensure that the government would be able to continue to implement the COVID-19 response strategies mandated under Republic Act number 11525, known as the COVID-19 Vaccination Program Act, and Republic Act number 11712, known as the Public Health Emergency Benefits and Allowances for Health Care Workers Act. A month ago, before the year ended, the President then expressed, I suppose in reaction to this request for extension, that he was hesitant to continue the state of calamity because according to him, we are technically not in a state of calamity anymore. And our good Senate President, I believe, had made a statement to the effect that it's not good for our image. And I agree with both gentlemen, no, that I think all of us want to move forward. All of us want to normalize our lives. But it is incumbent upon each one of us as legislators, as a body, to ask ourselves, ano ba yung effect ng declaration of calamity na yan? Why does the DOH, our technical expert, want us to extend that? So let's study this, Your Honors, and give it some time to sink in na ano ba yung effect nito sa atin. It is imperative upon us as legislators to understand what effect the declaration has on our ability to respond to any possible surge in the COVID infections. So this is our situation, Your Honors. There are important provisions under the laws that I mentioned that are anchored on the declaration of the state of calamity and or public health emergency by the President of the Philippines. And that is the reason DOH emphasized that without such extension, it would affect the implementation of different COVID-19 response strategies of the government. So bakit ba kailangan meron tayong COVID response strategies? Well, clearly, one of the response was for us to be vaccinated. So if we did not get vaccinated, saan tayo ngayon, right? So we need to ask ourselves, hindi tayo expert. I am a lawyer. My colleague over there, Senator JV, who like me, chaired the Committee on Health, is not a doctor. I'm also not a doctor. Senator Bongo, our current chairman of the committee, we're not doctors. So we listen to the science. Why was it important that we had these laws that allowed government to take certain actions that otherwise, without the law, they could not do? Kasi we are governed by laws, and I will go through each one. First, the law allowed negotiated procurement of COVID-19 vaccines. Ano ibig sabihin nun? Ibig sabihin nun, under the law that we passed, pwedeng i-negotiate yung pagbili ng COVID-19 vaccines. Because without that law, you have to go through the public bidding under the Government Procurement Reform Act. So, siguro most of us who follow this know that negotiated yung pag-purchase nung mga vaccines. So if there will be another variant in the future, without a law, hindi pwedeng mag-negotiate, magbibidding, and that takes a long time. So that is one effect. I'll go to the next. The authority to administer COVID-19 vaccines with emergency use authorizations. Hindi ho ba naaalala nyo na nung nagkaroon na tayo ng vaccines, ang daming nagbabakuna. Kada kasulok-sulukan ng Pilipinas may nagpapabakuna. Well, yun yung goal natin. Sino nagbabakuna sa inyo? Do you know that those people who were administering the vaccines had a special authority? Kasi hindi pwedeng kung sino-sino lang magbakuna. Hindi pwede yun. It's not allowed. So, Section 9 of the COVID-19 Vaccination Program Act, RA 11525, specifically says that it allowed licensed pharmacists and midwives who are duly trained by the DOH to administer COVID-19 vaccines. Without that, hindi sila pwedeng magpabakuna. So kung magkakaroon ng surge, wala tayong vaccinators. We don't have the same amount of vaccinators because they will not be allowed. So right now, hindi na sila covered. Now, the benefits of health and non-healthcare workers is another thing. This is a huge help to our dedicated health workers that allowed them during these most difficult times to serve us. I won't go through the details. This has been discussed many times, but there is a health emergency allowance that is given to these health workers sa low-risk area, 3,000, sa medium-risk area, 6,000, high-risk area, 9,000. Well, obviously, kung wala namang COVID, wala namang declaration and there's no need, hindi naman ho talaga kailangan yung allowance. Pero kung meron man, then there's no basis to give them and syempre, they deserve it naman kung nagkaroon ng emergency and nagtatrabaho naman sila. There are other details on the compensation kasi pag namatay, pag nagkasakit, nandiyan yan, alam niyo yan, I won't go into that anymore. Next, the utilization of appropriate funds, including the Quick Response Fund. This is so important to LGUs because the LGUs submit their request together with supporting documents to the NDRRMC. And mahabang diskusyon to, but because we had a law that allowed the use of the Quick Response Fund for COVID, namamadali yung process and it becomes easier for them to access. So again, hindi nila ma-access to without that. There are also other agencies who have built in quick response funds, including DPWH, Department of National Defense, DepEd, DSWD, DA, etc. Another important aspect that is affected by the declaration, the authority of the Health Technology Assessment Council, otherwise known as HTAC, to make recommendations on COVID-19 vaccines based on preliminary data from phase 3 clinical trials. Dear colleagues, without this specific authorization to HTAC to make those recommendations, alam nyo naman yon, pag dinedevelop ang isang drug, it takes a long time for these drugs to get to market because they must go through the process. You cannot rush the development of these drugs, but because there was an urgent need determined by WHO and all the recognized health authorities all over the world, it became a standard to allow the drugs even if they were still in phase 3, only in phase 3. So very clearly what our law says, the HTAC shall have the authority to make recommendations to the DOH on COVID-19 vaccines based on preliminary data from phase 3 clinical trials and World Health Organization recommendations in the absence of completed phase 3 and phase 4 clinical trials. So if this law is not in effect, then we cannot access vaccines. So even if the US, Japan, whoever makes these drugs that are very effective, we cannot access them if they are only in phase 3 preliminary trials because we have no law that authorizes the sale or even the donation and the use of these drugs in our country. We'd like to point out, Your Honor, that the WH foresees the lifting of the COVID-19 as a public health emergency in 2023, but it emphasized that surveillance and monitoring of infection remains critical. So even if the COVID-19 pandemic officially ends and therefore the virus becomes endemic, government should continue its ongoing efforts in controlling the spread of COVID-19 virus because nandyan pa rin yun. When you say the pandemic ends, it's just a change in how the virus is moving around and affecting us, pero nandyan pa rin siya. So we still have to have actions in place. We still have to have that response available so that the most vulnerable in our country, the elderly, the PWDs, those with comorbidities, they are protected. And our health workers are also protected and given due recognitions for the work that they will have to suddenly do in case something happens. As legislators who have worked on the passage of necessary laws that were needed to urgently respond to the pandemic, we must equally be concerned about responding when COVID-19 virus becomes endemic. Determining the effects of the non-extension of the COVID-19 state of calamity is very important, dear colleagues. Ensuring that our ongoing efforts to minimize the effects of COVID on our daily lives, as I mentioned, the safety and welfare of the most vulnerable, the frontliners, the health workers, the economy that we want to revive and we want to continue to see support families, all of this should not be undermined and we need to be able to respond quickly. Thus, dear colleagues, I humbly submit that this privileged speech be taken up by the Committee on Health so that we as legislators can be responsible in our task and determine what laws need to be enacted to ensure that we learn the lessons. It's okay, Your Honors, na, no, let me rephrase my statement. The whole world seems surprised by the effects of COVID-19, and yet there were enough signals to tell us to be prepared. Your Honor, kung ngayon hindi pa tayo ma-prepare sa susunod, wala na ho tayong iba pang sisisihin kundi sarili natin. So let us be vigilant and let us be decisive and let us be responsive to the task at hand, which is to ensure that we are ready for any, not even COVID alone, but for future pandemics, for future health emergencies. And let us pass the laws that will allow our technical people, our health workers, our frontliners to respond with haste and responsibly as well. Thank you, Mr. President, dear colleagues.
Thank you very much, distinguished colleague from Pateros and Taguig City. Session suspended for 1 minute. Walang majority leader.
Mr. President, before we continue, we would like to acknowledge also guest of our dear colleague, Senator Bongo, Mayor Ami Olegario of Ipil, Zamboanga, Sibugay. She's here with us. Thank you.
We'd like to recognize the mayor. Mayor, welcome to your Senate.
Mr. President, this juncture, Senator Francis Tolentino would like to ask some questions, Mr. President, regarding privileged speech of Senator Cayetano.
Our
I move that he
distinguished
be
colleague,
recognized.
Senator Francis Tolentino from the province of Cavite is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. If the good gentle lady from Taguig would like to yield to some questions as well as retrieve her reading glasses in front of me, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, it would be an honor to respond. I'm not an expert on this. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist, but I am very much concerned that, as I was telling the gentleman who said that he would like to clarify some things, I'm just concerned that I'm concerned that we as legislators must be aware of the repercussions of our being in a state where there is no declaration of a calamity, and what responses are now affected by this state, and if there is a need for us to do anything about it.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was not able to hear the entirety of the Her Honor's privileged speech, but for the record, Mr. President, your Senate Blue Ribbon Committee is currently in the midst of its hearings relative to the wasted 44 million COVID vaccine doses, Mr. President. So my understanding coming from the Her Honor is that there is a need to continue existing policies so that there will no longer be a perceived gap insofar as vaccination, implementation, and procurement initiatives are concerned. Am I correct in that aspect, Your Honor?
Actually, Mr. President, the point I was trying to raise is that when we are no longer in a state of calamity, the effect of certain provisions under various laws that we pass, these certain provisions will no longer exist. And one of those provisions, as His Honor mentioned, is the negotiated procurement of COVID-19 vaccines. This is how we have procured for the past 2 years. This is how we have procured our vaccines. I am not making a statement as to whether this is the best way to do it, if we should change it. I am more than happy if there are findings, if there are recommendations that we change the way we procure. All I'm saying is that everything that we have done to respond to COVID, we will not have access to those. We will not be able to act in those ways anymore because there is no law giving those authorities. So one would be the negotiated procurement, the others would be the vaccinators that were authorized. These would be the pharmacists and midwives. Otherwise, they are not authorized to vaccinate. So yung rollout natin ng vaccines would be curtailed because remember, we had to pull out doctors and nurses and we had to authorize these other health professionals. The other example I gave was the authority of HTAC because it was HTAC along with the recommendations of WHO that said even though we are just in phase 3 clinical trials, we will proceed. That was the practice all over the world. But even though it's the practice all over the world, we cannot do it here if there's no authority given. So that's all I'm saying, Your Honor, that we study this so that if there are steps that we need to take, and there could be new steps based on new findings, then let's be prepared to pass those laws so that we can make those responses that are necessary. They don't have to be the same.
Yes, Mr.
Sorry for
President.
the lengthy response, but I just wanted you to understand the context, Your Honor.
Yes, I now fully understand, Mr. President. But is the foundational issue now clear that we are no longer in a state of emergency, or are we coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic as part of a global reaction after 2.5 years that it's no longer that we no longer have the pandemic right now, or it's about to end, soon to end. And
Well, Your Honor, I can respond to that. By way of legal definition that allows the responses that I mentioned to take place, that allows government to take certain actions, we are not, because it was not extended. The last one was Proclamation number 57 on September 12, 2022, and it expired December 31. It expired on December 31, 2022. So yung legal effect ng pandemic, the legal effect of the calamity is done. But His Honor's question is right, because WHO, as the international organization, has not yet made that declaration. Pero for us to act legally, it's not WHO. We passed our laws based on WHO and the determinations of our own government. So right now, we don't have it.
so, Mr. President, am I correct in dissecting the premise that the legal situation can be summarized into 3 or 4 aspects? 1, the procurement. 2, the effect of the non-extension of the state of emergency insofar as the actions of LGUs and national agencies are concerned. 3, the operations of the government. And 4, the private sector. So if there is no extension, for instance, if I go to number 1, procurement, even if there is no extension, bidded out or negotiated procurements will still be continued. They're not talking about bivalent vaccines, those about to be delivered, especially those for the pediatric COVID-19 vaccines, among others. So will Her Honor agree that even if there is no extension of emergency, of the state of emergency, the four that I specified would not be drastically affected legally?
I'm not prepared to respond to that, Your Honor, because the response would be different. It would be different as to whether it's a drastic change. We can discuss that. We can ask the experts, which is precisely why I delivered this privileged speech, so that it could be discussed. For example, like the procurement. Not an expert on procurement. All I know is that our practice is based on Government Procurement Reform Act, which requires that there's a public bidding. So precisely why during the declaration of this COVID calamity, it was determined that it would be faster to do the negotiated procurement. So as to whether there's a better way, and now that we know all the suppliers and bidding is easier, I really don't have any personal, at this point, I don't have a preference. I just know that in many cases, negotiated is the preferred manner to expedite the purchase. That's for the procurement. The other examples I gave was like the vaccinators that are used all over the country, whether it's LGU initiated or national government initiated. The fact remains, the delivery of vital healthcare services were curtailed because of COVID. A lot of doctors were even became frontliners, having to deal with just vaccinating and handling emergency cases. So we can't afford to be pulling them out. Studies show that there are so many cancer patients that did not receive their chemotherapy. There are so many dialysis patients that missed it. So we can't go back to that situation. We need to empower these vaccinators to do their job. Are there other ways to go about it? I'm sure there are. And having a hearing, and maybe DOH can suggest who else can be vaccinated. So again, I'm not saying that we go back to the way it was. I'm saying we need to be prepared, and in many cases, there may be a requirement for legislation act to ensure that we are prepared. On the quick response, perhaps His Honor would know better, because precisely the quick response fund is a quick response funds na madaling ang i-access, no? So baka naman, hindi naman vital. Kaninong telepono yan? So as I was saying, baka naman there is no need kasi but I don't know. Again, I'm not an expert in quick response. That provision was in the law precisely to already declare, hindi na to pagdedebatihan, access for quick response for the purpose of a COVID response is already given. It's already available. They just have to ask for it. So in that sense, it also made the process shorter. Yun. And then the other example I'll give is itong benefits natin to health workers. Malaking issue po yun sa kanila. Again, I'm not saying that they should get it, they should not get it. I'm saying if we are in the state of calamity and they are working overtime, exposing themselves, then it should be clear that they should get it. Eh kung wala naman, I also agree that, di wala, but there can be provisions in law that we put in that perhaps the department secretary, which we do not have, we have an OIC, can make that declaration. Para klaro lang, no? So, yun lang naman sa akin, Mr. President.
Just two quick questions, Mr. President. Is the IATF still functional or functioning right now from the
Pag sinabi kasing IATF, and this is just a light response, si
Yes.
Secretary Galvez
Supposed to be on top of everything.
is already National Defense Secretary, and Vince Dizon is already in the private sector. Eh sila yung kilala kong IATF, plus of course Yusek Vergere, who's now our OIC. So kung meron mang IATF, and I think meron, not heard from them. But I think meron, di ba? Parang meron naman but I have not heard. I think they are busy with other things, which is good. It's a good sign. It means
We're back to normal.
we're back to normal. But my point is, and that is my job as the in-house self-declared futurist, I need to ensure that we do our part in preparing for that future, na prepared tayo to act. And
because
yes.
Mr. President, because we used to have a daily briefing coming from an IATF spokesperson
Yes.
updating the general public as to the current situation based on science, etc., etc.
Meron pa naman si DOH, Your Honor. I think they just speak as DOH, but I think I know DOH is a member of IATF. So siguro since parang we're not in that state of calamity, hindi na yung parang nakikita natin na live, di ba, live broadcast, but I still do receive my updates.
So we still have a vaccine, sir.
Hindi ko alam if we have a vaccine, sir. That I do not know. I just know that I know that the DOH gives update on the COVID cases.
What about, Mr. President, recognizing the expertise of the various LGUs? And LGUs, under the local government code, are empowered to declare their own state of calamities. So are we now saying that because of the absence of the extension in that state of calamity declaration, LGUs now are empowered based on the situation on the ground on whether to have their own local state of calamity concerning COVID-19, and it has now highlighted their functions under the local government code. Is Her Honor willing to accept that? That even though the national government is silent, the LGUs are still functioning.
Actually, Mr. President, that is an interesting idea. This representation always has an open mind, but being a lawyer, we are governed by laws. And for example lang, no, one example yung binanggit kong health emergency benefits ng ating health workers, that law specifically states that they would get this during the COVID-19 or other public health emergency of national scale. So they will not get that, I believe, under the local declaration of calamity. As to the ability of LGUs to authorize a pharmacist or a midwife to vaccinate, parang yatang, I'm not sure if they also have that authority. On the vaccination program pala, sorry, to be very clear, the law that we passed, which allows these professionals I mentioned to vaccinate, it refers to a declaration that the period of the state of calamity by the President exists. So, ganun ka-specific yung authority na binigay natin, and effectively, this authority no longer exists.
But, Mr. President, I can still recall that during the midst of the lockdowns, various local government units were in conflict with the national government's decision. Cebu, for instance, would have its own COVID-19 policy relative to lockdowns, checkpoints, etc. The same is true with certain LGUs in Mindanao. So, is it now the appropriate time, given the relaxing attitude of the national government, to really, as I said a while ago, to really recognize the different LGUs as under the local government code again, under the General Welfare Clause, Section 16 of the local government code, as to have that delegated power to implement what the national government now is not doing. So, in effect, there is no lacuna, there is no vacuum here. What the national government has been doing before has been transferred to the local government units, and the effect would still be the same. Sans, for instance, the benefits given to the nationally employed nurses, pharmacists, etc. But in terms of the effects on the populace, it's still the same. Or it can be better, because the local government units would know the real score on the ground. Ilan na ba yung nabakunahan? Ilan pa yung nagkasakit? Sila rin naman talaga yung nagtrabaho. Sila yung humarap sa COVID-19. It's not the national IATF. It's not the vaccine czar, no offense to them. It's the governor. It's the mayor. It's the barangay captain. It's the barangay health worker. These were the real heroes. Sila yung araw-araw na humaharap, nagbibigay ng ayuda at nagbabakuna. So, Mr. President, my theory is this. Kahit po nawala na yung policy, kahit nawala na extension, we should not worry because the LGUs are there. Section 16 of the Local Government Code is being operationalized by the various LGUs. Am I correct in that premise, Your Honor?
Your Honor, Mr. President, our colleague made statements that I wholeheartedly agree with. The LGUs were the frontliners in dealing with COVID-19. My own brother, Lino, former mayor of Taguig City, I saw through his efforts and the efforts of Metro Manila. I speak of Metro Manila only because I'm from Metro Manila, no? But of course, the efforts of mayors and LGUs all over the country were very similar. Talagang literally buwis buhay, Your Honor. I have no arguments there. They deserve all the commendations. They literally risked their lives, no? You're right, Your Honor, yung pagbigay ng ayuda na nagkagulo-gulo, LGU naman ang nagbibigay. Sila naman ang may alam kung sino yung kailangan tumanggap. I agree with that. But we cannot change the law, Your Honor. I'm not aware that the LGU, the Local Government Code, effectively amends our national laws that for health reasons only allowed certain persons to vaccinate. No? I agree with this owner wholeheartedly that they will be the one to determine na, uy, parang dumadami, uy, malala, di ba? Marami palang na ano. And then, let's say internationally, merong bagong drug na develop. So can they procure on their own? They can. Your Honor is correct. We have enough laws that allow them to do this. But Your Honor will recall, many of these LGUs also entered into their own contracts, and they happen to choose a supplier, if I'm not mistaken, na ang tagal dumating. Dumating naman, pero dala ng supply and demand, yung brand na yon na naglumapit sa lahat ng mga LGU, ang tagal dumating. So like in the situation of Taguig, and I hope I'm recalling this correctly, by the time na dumating yung supplies ng mga companies, pati nung Taguig City, the national government already provided naman. And in fact, months later, and perhaps our colleagues can have the same experience, tumatawag yung mga companies sa amin asking kung saan nila pwedeng i-donate yung kanilang vaccine na binili kasi nabakunahan na lahat ng tao nila. So I'm talking naman about private, no? But my point is, may role pa rin ng national here, and position myself as the expert. I just feel that this is ripe for a discussion. The national government can initiate it. It can be the IATF that initiates it. Perhaps a hearing. That's why I want this referred to the Committee on Health, so that clear lang naman sa atin. What happened, His Honor will recall, on March 23, tinrabaho natin, pinuyat natin yung bill natin on the declaration and the Bayanihan Act, because we had to act urgently. Sana hindi na tayo dumating doon. Tsaka, I mean, we did our best, di ba, given that the limited time that we have had. But, yun nga, we have lessons that we have learned. So I just want this to be studied carefully. We can probably have even a better response, Your Honor. And His Honor is absolutely correct in saying that perhaps a lot of this can now be relegated to the LGUs. They had the opportunity to shine, and they did shine. They are experienced now. A lot of this they can handle. Pero siguro, Your Honor, like yung pag-analyze nung mismong effects nung which drug is better, we rely on the national government pa rin for that, no? And since His Honor, last point I want to make is has his own hearing on what lessons can we learn from these negotiated contracts, we'd be very happy for that to be included in the discussion. I just know that this is usually the path taken to expedite when procurements have to be done more rapidly.
I totally agree with Your Honor that the rites of passage, especially during those dark pandemic days,
Yes.
was difficult. But I can still vividly recall and having opposed the tripartite agreement schemes being proposed then by the IATF. Sana nabigyan na lang ng greater roles ang LGUs. But lessons were learned. Perhaps we won't be facing another pandemic in our lifetime.
Actually, we will,
Perhaps
Your Honor. Sorry to interrupt, pero the
There is
science
another one.
tells us that the
There's
chances of
another one.
in our lifetime, no? The chances daw are high. Sana nga
but
hindi.
we have learned. We have called from some from the lessons, and I think Her Honor is correct that there should be a standby
Authority?
authority
Something like that, yeah.
given to the national government, and at the same time, recognize the role, the bigger role being played, supposed to be played by the LGUs as the frontliners. So, yun lamang po, Mr. President. I have no further questions, and I thank the gentle lady from Taguig for having raised again this very relevant current COVID-19 issue, which is still lingering in our midst. Maraming salamat po, Mr. President.
Thank you, my distinguished colleague.
Mr. President. Mr.
Thank you,
President,
thank you.
yeah, our distinguished Deputy Minority Leader, Senator Risa Hontiveros, would also like to propound some questions.
distinguished-
I move that she be recognized, Mr.
Our
President.
distinguished Deputy Minority Floor Leader, Senator Risa Hontiveros, is recognized.
Salamat kayo, Mr. President. Actually, not an interpellation of the gentle lady from Taguig and Pateros, but a manifestation in support of her privileged speech. We also already raised this concern, Mr. President, and its implication for the COVID-19 vaccination program and benefits of healthcare workers. So as far as we are concerned, the COVID-19 pandemic situation has not been downgraded, and the public health emergency still exists. Matagal na po nating pinanawagan na bigyang pansin ito. Yet, unfortunately, the Department of Health opted for a legislative track to the umano balance health and the economy. Parang nangyari po, Mr. President, sa atin sa Kongreso, pinasa ang responsibilidad na mas madali sana kung inaksyonan na lamang ng Malacanang agad. Ni-raise po natin ito, Mr. President, gentle lady from Taguig and Pateros, noong September 2022, and even during the budget deliberations. So salamat kaayo, Mr. President, and thank you to the gentle lady from Taguigan Pateros for again raising this important matter to our attention.
Thank you, Your Honor. We appreciate the attention and concern Her Honor has. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
With that, I move that we refer the privileged speech of Senator Pia Cayetano and interpellations to the Committee on Health and Demography as the primary committee and secondary committees, Committee on Sustainable Development Goals, Innovation, and Futures Thinking. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move that we proceed with the privileged speech and recognize Senator Jinggoy Estrada, the distinguished...
Before we recognize him, I ask for a 1 minute suspension.
Yes, move for a minute suspension. President, I move that we proceed with the privileged speech and recognize the distinguished gentleman from the city of San Juan, Senator Jinggoy Estrada, to deliver his speech.
We recognize Senator Jinggoy Ejercito Estrada. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I rise today on a matter of personal and collective privilege. A disturbing news last night caught my attention. The discovery last Sunday of the charred remains of a 34-year-old overseas Filipino worker, Julebi Ranara, in a desert in Kuwait. Nakapanlulumo ang balitang ito na sa unang buwan ng taon na meron tayong kababayan na walang awang kinitilan ng buhay sa malagim na paraan sa bansang Kuwait, na ikaapat sa bansa sa gitnang silangan na may pinakamaraming OFWs at miyembro pa ng International Labor Organization. Gustuin man natin itrato ito bilang isang isolated case, hindi natin may kakaila na ang Kuwait ay isa sa mga bansa na may mataas na kaso ng pang-aabuso at pagkamatay ng ating mga OFWs. Isinasakripisyo natin ang ating mga kababayang OFWs para ipahiram sa ibang bansa upang tulungan ang kanilang ekonomiya. Hindi na po tama na patuloy pa natin pakawalan ang ating mga OFWs sa kasalukuyang sistema at kalakaran na parang sa kanilang pagpunta sa Middle East ay mistulang nasa hukay ng kamatayan ang kanilang isang paa. Madam President, what's more harrowing in Ranara's case is the report by the local news outlets in the state of Kuwait that the arrested perpetrator who confessed to the crime is a 17-year-old Kuwaiti national and a son of her employer who allegedly raped and impregnated her. The victim was beaten, ran over by the perpetrator's car twice, and was burnt and left for dead in the desert. Inuulit ko po, at alang-alang din sa pamilya. Ang mga detalye na yan ay batay sa news report, hindi sa official autopsy o police report. Kaya nga dapat lang malaman natin ang totoo. Kaya nga din dapat lang humarap sa korte ang halimaw na anak ng employer ni Jollibee. Huwag pakawalan hanggat siya ay mahatulan. Due to numerous cases of murdered OFWs in Kuwait, the Philippine government, in several instances, had imposed deployment ban to Kuwait. The lifting of the last ban in February 2020 was the result of an agreement reached between the Philippine government and the state of Kuwait on additional safeguards for our migrant workers. With this development, we saw again the influx of Filipino domestic workers in Kuwait. But regardless of the agreement reached between the two governments, we still failed to shield our kababayans from abusive employers. Ngunit, Ginoong Pangulo, hindi po ako nawawalan ng loob na kaya natin mabago at maiayos ang kasulukuyang sistema, lalo na't meron na tayong Department of Migrant Workers na tututok sa interes, proteksyon at kapakanan ng ating mga bagong bayani. We are grateful for the painstaking efforts of our DMW Secretary Susan Ople in negotiating for new labor reforms, which focused on the adoption of a standard employment contract to ensure better welfare protection and guard against the trafficking of migrant workers. What appears to be lacking, though, is a mechanism for monitoring the conditions of our OFWs and the screening of would-be employers to further assure our kababayans that they will not end up in the hands of exploitative and vicious individuals. Panahon na para tutukan natin ang pag-aaral sa panawagan ng pagpapatanggal ng kafala system gaya ng ginawa sa Bahrain at sa Qatar kung saan na-abolish na ang kafala system. Sa Bahrain daw po, gobyerno, hindi individual employers ang nag-sponsor sa mga OFWs. Matagal na po nilang napakinabangan ang kafala system na ito na hindi natin may kakaila na nagiging sanhi ng pang-aabuso, panliligalig at modern slavery sa ating mga OFWs. Panahon na mas higit na paigtingin ang panawagan na buwagin ang sistemang ito. Nais ko manawagan sa Department of Migrant Workers, sa Department of Foreign Affairs at sa mga kinaukulang ahensya na paigtingin pa ang monitoring mechanism sa mga bansa kung saan tayo may pinakamaraming deployed OFWs at kung saan din tayo nagtatala ng kaso ng pang-aabuso. Ayusin at palakasin pa natin ang sistema ng komunikasyon, monitoring, support at agarang assistance sa ating mga OFWs sa mga bansang ito. Nais din natin paalalahanan ang mga lisensyadong recruitment agencies dito at sa ibang bansa na ang lisensya ninyo ay may kalakip na responsibilidad. Tiyakin ninyo na ang employer at ang kanilang pamilya ay maayos ang pakikitungo sa ating mga overseas Filipino workers. Ang monitoring ng workers ay shared responsibility ng private at public sectors. Naasahan natin ang DMW na higpitan pa ang pagbabantay sa kalidad at kakayahan ng mga miyembro ng recruitment industry. Kung pwede rin sana na doon na lamang muna tayo sa mga bansang signatory ng ILO Domestic Workers Convention na lang magpadala ng ating mga Filipino domestic workers. Nais ko rin pong manawagan sa ating mga embahada sa iba't ibang ahensya na isama sa kanilang programa ang social media campaign sa pagpapataas ng imahe at dignidad ng Filipino laborers, lalo na ng ating Filipino domestic workers, putting special emphasis on addressing racial discrimination and the fight against gender-based violence. I am not here to point fingers at anyone. I am merely out to express my condemnation on the gruesome death of Ranara, who, just like the millions of our OFWs, was simply seeking better opportunities abroad so that she could provide for her family and loved ones at home, but ended up in harm's way. Base sa mga napaulat, matindi ang kalupitan dinanas ng ating kababayan bago pa man siya pinatay. Alam ko na hindi sapat ang mga salita ng pakikiramay at pagkondena sa mga may sala para maibsan ang sakit na pinagdaraanan ng kanilang mga naulila. Siya po ay may 4 na anak na maliliit pa. Ang bunso po niya ay 1 taon at 5 buwan gulang pa lamang. Pumunta po si Julie B. sa Middle East upang maghanap buhay para sa kanyang pamilya. Hindi upang makitilan ng buhay at sa Uisit na ito. Parumal-dumal na paraan. Sabi siya, palitan nyo na eh. Madam President, we urge both governments to apply the fullest extent of the law to ensure that justice is served and that the perpetrator is held to account. Hinding-hindi ko po makasasanayan ang makabasa ng mga balita ng pang-aabuso at pagkamatay ng ating mga kababayan na bagamat tinatawag natin bagong bayani, ay tila parang hanggang ngayon ay napapabayaan pa rin natin. Sa kaso po ni Julie B. Ranara, hangad po natin ang madaliang hustisya. Sa kaso naman po ng humigit kumulang na 154,700 na household domestic workers sa Kuwait, base sa datos ng Polo OWA Kuwait noong June 2022, hangad ko po ang mas maigting na pagtutok mula sa ating Department of Migrant Workers at mga kinaukulang ahensya. Sa mahigit 1 milyong OFWs sa iba pang panig ng mundo, lagi po kaming nakaalalay sa inyo at hindi po kami mapapagod sa pagsasabatas ng kailangan lehislasyon para sa inyong kapakanan at interes. Maraming salamat po, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just like to first things first put on record my sincerest condolences and extend our prayers to the family and loved ones of Miss Julie B. Tabilis Ranara. It's just so unfortunate that this another incident like this will happen to our kababayan. I will reserve my right to ask questions later, Mr. President. Madam President, may I just give the floor now to the chairperson of the Committee on Migrant Workers, Senator Raffy Tulfo, for his interpellation/manifestations, Mr. President. Madam
Before
President.
we recognize Senator Raffy Tulfo, may this representation also request to be the last to interpellate Senator Estrada. Tayo po ay nakikiisa sa galit at kalungkutan na dulot ng report na lumabas kahapon na salaysay ni Senator Estrada. We recognize Senator Raffy Tulfo. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Good afternoon, Madam President and my dear colleagues. As the chairman of the Committee on Migrant Workers, I would like to associate myself with the speech of our Vice Chair, Senator Jinggoy Estrada. The death of another one of our heroes should never be taken lightly. One life lost is one too many. Kumari pong mangyari ito sa isang katulad ni Julie B. Ranara, hindi malayo na mangyari rin ito sa iba pang kababayan natin sa Kuwait. Kailangan natin may sigurado na ang iba pa nating mga OFW ay protektado. Itong 2022, may 69,145 na new hires at 31,078 na rehires sa Kuwait. A total of 100,223 ang nasa Kuwait. We owe these more than 100,000 overseas Filipino workers the protection that we promised them when we allowed them to go abroad for the sake of their families. Noong mga nakaraang taon, naitigil po ang pagpapadala natin sa Kuwait dahil sa mga insidenteng katulad na nangyari kay Julie B. Noong 2018 sa Kuwait din, may namatay na Filipino domestic helper na si Joanna Dimafilis na natagpuang patay sa isang freezer. At noong 2019, si Jeneline Villavende naman ay na-rape at namatay din sa Kuwait. Na-lift ang ban dahil nangako na ayusin ng gobyerno ng Kuwait ang kondisyon ng ating mga OFWs sa kanilang bansa. Ngayon, ito na namang karumal-dumal na pangyaring ang sinapit ng isa nating kababayan. Kailangan natin pag-aralan kung ano ang sitwasyon na kinaharap ng mga kababayan natin na nadideploy sa Kuwait. Ligtas pa ba sila doon? May suporta ba ang gobyerno ng Kuwait sa ating mga kababayan na pupunta roon? Sa kaso ni Julie B, mabuti na lang at naaresto na agad ang salarin na anak ng kanyang employer. Pero sana'y hindi na nangyari ito kung nasasala lang na mabuti ang mga potential employers ng ating mga OFWs. Matagal ko na pong sinusulong na dapat may katumbas na security requirements sa mga nais maging employer ng mga OFWs. Hindi yung mga OFWs lang pinagsusumiti ng napakaraming requirements bago mapapunta sa abroad. Kung sila ay naninigurado na ligtas sila sa makuha nilang OFW, dapat tayo din manigurado na ligtas ang mga kababayan natin. Ikukonsulta ko po ito sa DMW at OWA para matigil ang ganitong mga pangyari. Ganun pa man, I commend the efforts of the DMW and OWA in their support and immediate action regarding the case of Julie B and for the needs of her family. I have been informed that they will be given by OWA a guaranteed financial aid of 220,000 pesos and an additional 800,000 pesos from life insurance provided by agency. Kanina po, nakausap ko ang mother ni Julie B at nagkukwentuhan po kami at nakwento niya po sa akin ang mga pangyari. At ako po, on the spot, naawa, kanina rin po, nagpatid po ako ng personal kong pera na 50,000 pesos sa isa kong staff para tulong sa kanya. While these amounts will never replace the life of Julie B, it will alleviate any worry that they may have financially. And we hope that the DMW and OWA continue to give this kind of service for all our OWAs, or OFWs. And as the chairman of the Committee on Migrant Workers, I will not stop at being the representative here in the Senate. I will fight for what they deserve as the modern-day heroes of our country and their families for whom they risk their lives by venturing into foreign lands just to provide for them. Again, I thank Senator Jinggoy Estrada for bringing this matter to the attention before this body. And before I end my speech, meron lang po akong mga gustong karagdagan. Tama nga po si Senator Jinggoy na kailangan talaga masusing monitoring needed because right now, as I see it, kulang po talaga ang tinatawag na monitoring para masiguro na safe ang ating mga OFWs. Ang isa pong matagal ko na pong iminimungkahi sa mga kinaukulan ngayon sa ating DMW ay yung bakit kapag ang ating OFW pumunta ng abroad, kinakailangan nila ng police clearance, barangay clearance, NBI clearance, napakaraming clearance, parang kinailangan nilang dumaan sa butas ng karayom bago sila ma-deploy para masiguro na yung ating mga OFW ay walang record, hindi masamang tao pagdating doon sa Saudi. Pero bakit ito mga employer, wala man lang silang isinusumiti na kahit na anong record na magpapatunay na sila ay malinis, na ma-okay ang kanilang pagkatao para masiguro na safe ang ating mga OFWs. Lumilitaw, marami sa mga employers ay may mga criminal records, mga dating rapists, mga dating kriminal, dating mga manloloko, loko-loko, at hindi po na-screen. Yan po ang isa sa mga bagay na sinisiguro ko po na matutugunan na ng ating DMW to make sure kung ating mga OFWs ay well-screened bago pumunta ng abroad, dapat din ang mga employers na tatanggap sa kanila, sila din po ay well-screened to make sure na maganda kanilang record at hindi mapapahamak ang ating mga OFWs na tatanggap sa kanila roon. Isa pa po, tama po si Senator Jinggoy, ay monitoring. Yan din po ang aking sinasuggest noon pa. Kulang po sa monitoring. Palagay ko po may pagkukulang dito ang ating mga otoridad. I'm very sure, bago maganap ang rape dito kay Jollibee, meron na pong mga ginagawang hindi magaganda itong kanyang amo. And I'm sure siya po ay nakapagsumbong because hindi naman po agad-agad re-rapin po ng isang amo doon ang ating OFW right there and then. Meron po tinatawag na pagnanasa. Meron po tinatawag na pag-attempt. And doon pa lamang ang ating OFW for sure, yan po yung nagsumbong sa ating mga kinaukulan, sa agency, sa FRA, Foreign Recruitment Agency, o dili kaya nagsumbong sa Polo. Pero ano ang ginagawang aksyon? Usually, sa akin po karanasan, A, sasabihin po ng mga recruitment agency, magtiyaga-tiyaga ka lang muna. B, parating ng replacement mo. And then C, tatakbong OFW sa Polo. Pagdating sa Polo, kadalasan, walang sumasagot sa telepono. At kapag meron man, tatamad-tamad. Another thing, Madam President, na na-notice ko nung last hearing namin, consultative meeting, akin pong napansin na ayon po doon sa DMW at sa mga nakausap ko doon sa consultative meeting, 100 OFWs ang ni-recruit ng isang pangkaraniwang agency papuntang abroad. Just imagine, 100 OFWs a month para ang isang recruitment agency ay matatawag na isang agency karapat-dapat na magpadala ng mga workers sa abroad. Just imagine, 100 OFWs kada buwan. Sa isang taon, that is 1,200 OFWs. 1,200 OFW sa isang taon. Now, ang tanong, ilan ang mga tauhan ng mga recruitment agencies dito at yung sumasalod doon sa abroad na FRA? Kadalasan, 2-3. Paano sagutin ang telepono, pag tumawag ang 1,200 halimbawa sabay-sabay dahil nagka-problema, tatatlo lamang po ang mga tao na sumasagot sa telepono. Those problems I have already addressed and I have already talked to the DMWs. Even while we speak, yan po ay kanilang pinag-aaralan kung paano maresolba ang ganong klaseng problema. I am not going to ask questions, but all I can say is I support fully ito pong privilege speech ni Senator Jinggoy Estrada, and I will work hand in hand with him and with the DMW para maprotektahan po ang kapakanan ng ating tinatawag na modern day heroes, ang ating mga OFWs. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Senator Tulfo. Madam President, if I may just add.
Yes. Senator Estrada.
Thank you, Madam President. Kung pwede lang po akong magdagdag ng karagdagang impormasyon tungkol dun kung paano ni-recruit itong si Julie Ranada. Okay. Julie applied with PRA Catalyst International Manpower Services. Ito yung local recruitment agency dito sa atin as a domestic worker in Kuwait. Her Kuwait recruitment agency was Platinum International Office for Recruitment of Domestic Manpower. And her direct employer was Owayed Johaish Methey Alazmi. Julie B. completed the processing of her documents on June 28, 2022 and arrived in Kuwait on July 12, 2022, a few weeks after. Okay, ito yung masakit. Based on the case management system, Catalyst, yung kanyang local recruitment agency, has 12 recruitment violation cases with 7 cases still pending before the Education Bureau of the Department of Migrant Workers. But number 3, both Platinum International Office for Recruitment of Domestic Manpower, yung kanilang FRA, and the employer and the direct employer have no record of having been charged with a disciplinary action case. Ang sinasabi ko lang po rito, mahal na Pangulo, ay itong local recruitment agency na nag-recruit kay Julie ay merong pending na 12 kaso before the Adjudication Bureau of the DMW. Dapat ito, dapat ito, kino-close shop na ito, hindi na sinasara na ito, at hindi na maaring mag-operate. Dahil hanggat may pending case ka pa, ibig sabihin na marami kang ginagawang violation. If I am correct, Madam President.
Tama yan,
And
Madam President.
I think, to my dear colleague, Senator Tulfo, if this privileged speech of mine will be referred to your committee, I think we have to summon the owner of this local recruitment agency to shed light on how they recruited Julie B. Ranara, I mean to say.
Yeah, if I may go back to what I said earlier, Madam President, dapat talaga meron screening, matinding screening ang gagawin ng ating mga recruitment agency dito, maging doon sa abroad, yung sa foreign recruitment agency, screening doon sa magiging employer ng ating OFW. Kasi again, I repeat, for the end time, bago makapunta ng abroad ang ating OFW, ang worker doon, katakot-takot na screening, magpapakita ng mga kung ano-anong dokumento, come up with so many requirements to ensure na malinis siya, wala siyang record, at maging safe ang kanyang employer when she arrives there. On the other hand, walang pinapakita na anumang klaseng dokumento o patunay ang employer na siya ay harmless, na siya ay okay na maging amo. Matter of fact, meron pa akong isang insidente na itong isang amo ng rape ng OFW, nagmalupit at ng rape, umalis yung OFW at hanggang sa makauwi ng Pilipinas, minarapat na hindi na magsampa ng kaso. Ito po ang nakakainit ng ulo at napamura po ako noon nung ako po'y nasa radyo sapagkat after na matanggal yung ating OFW doon, makatakas sa impyerno, nagpadala ang the same recruitment agency ng another OFW sa same employer. And for the second time, namolestya na naman yung pangalawang OFW. Kaya ako po'y napamura. Kita nyo yan.
I hope this is not the same recruitment agency.
Hindi naman. Hindi naman.
Senator Tulfo.
Pero I'd like to make it clear, Madam President, na hindi naman lahat ng mga agency ay loko-loko. Pero marami sa kanila. Kaya nga nung last consultative meeting, sinabi ko po na it's about time sarain ang mga FRA at mga recruitment agency dahil marami sa kanila yung mga hausyaw. Marami sa kanila yung walang kakayahan na magpatakbo ng recruitment agency. Marami sa kanila yung mga dami. Wala silang kapital, wala silang pera. Para kung sakaling kailangan ng OFW ng tulong, kailangan makauwi, wala silang pambigay ng pamasahe para makibalik na yung ating OFW. Kaya natitenga doon sa shelter natin. So, it's about time na sinabi ko po sa DMW sa last consultative meeting namin a few days ago na kailangan sarain itong mga FRA at itong mga recruitment agency. And I'll see to it as the chairman, committee chairman ng migrant workers na maisaayos itong ganitong klaseng problema at mailagay sa tweet. Ito pa nga po, Secretary Ople met with the parents of Jollibee on January 23. The parents told Secretary that they were able to talk to Jollibee on January 20, Friday. Jollibee complained of experiencing cruelty from the 17-year-old son of the employer and even recounted an incident where she was threatened with an ice pick. So, tama po ako. Noong nag-attempt pa lamang po itong perpetrator, nagsumbong na po si Jollibee sa magulang. Ang magulang po nagsumbong sa recruitment agency rito. Meron na po silang pinuntahan. However, yung napagsumbungan, hindi po kumilos. Dahil kung kumilos lamang po sana yung mga napagsumbungan ng recruitment agency, hindi po sana nangyari ito dahil agad-agad pinull out na si Jollibee at dinala sa shelter. Unfortunately, Madam President, kung nagsumbong lang sana sa akin tanggapan ito, I would assure you, buhay pa sana si Jollibee. Dahil ang dami ko na pong kasong ganito na pagsumbong sa akin, in less than 24 hours, napupulot po yung OFW at nadadala sa shelter, and then after a few days or weeks, na ipababalik sa bansa. It is very unfortunate na hindi po natawagan na aking pisina. But anyway, tapos na po ito. And magtulungan tayong lahat dito, Senator Jinggoy, na this will never happen ever again.
May we know, Senator Tulfo or Senator Estrada, if there is a hotline, a cell number like a 911 that any domestic helper deployed overseas may call so that instant action within the same hour if they can be rescued?
I think you have to, excuse me,
Yes.
if I may be recognized. I think they have to contact their respective polo offices, their respective countries, the host country, rather.
That's a long process.
There is no direct line. I don't think there is any direct line.
Would you suggest?
Sorry.
OFWs. Meron?
Madam President, meron po. Ito yung OWA hotline, 1348.
Here, based here.
Here, pero
Yeah.
wherever, kahit saan silang bansa, idadial lang nila +63 and then 2 and then 1348. It goes directly to DMW. And then the DMW, sila na mismong tatawag sa mga kinukulang kung saan bansa ka man.
I hope that works. And
I hope so. Kaya nga, subukan nga natin. Can we?
Sumbong
I
na
hope-
kay Tulfo
I
lahat
hope
siya.
that works, and I hope that that number can be disseminated to all, at least, maybe never mind the professionals, they would know what to do, but at least for domestic helpers in dire need for instant action. Yeah.
Makailang beses na po namin yan, disseminate yung information na po yan sa aking programa at maging po dun sa previous hearing, yan po ay naibanggit na. But anyway, pwede kong banggitin ito paulit-ulit. Ngayon, tinatawagan natin. Sige, tingnan ko nga kung nagre-ring.
Maghintay lamang ng konting sandali at manatili sa linya.
Hello.
Munting paalala, sa pagtawag sa OWA ay kalakip ang inyong pahintulot na makalap at magamit ang inyong mga personal na impormasyon na gagamitin lamang upang matugunan ng inyong pangailangan sa OWA. Para sa programa at serbisyo ng OWA, press 1.
That's a call center.
That's a call
Yeah,
center.
it's a call center.
Yeah, I think that has to be improved. Buti na lang tinawagan ko po ngayon. Then I will talk to Secretary Tutsople para maglagay ng bagong hotline na
Siguro
meron
po-
sasagot agad. Right there and then, 24/7 kung kinakailangan.
If I may add, siguro before the OFW leaves our country, meron orientation or briefing na ginagawa ang DOLE
Meron.
before. Now, I think it's the
There is.
Department of Migrant Workers. I think
Those-
ino-orient sila, binibrief sila, at binibigay din yung hotline number just in case na may mangyari na hindi maganda dun sa ating mga kababayang OFW.
Pero the problem, Madam President, may mga binibigyan na hotline tulad nga nito, hirap makontak. Kaya lang, yung hotline na tinatawagan, walang sumasagot. Tumatawag sila sa recruitment agency, sabi ko nga, 1,200 halimbawa, pinaka-minimum yan, na number of workers deployed ng nasabing recruitment agency, and they only have 3 people answering the phone. At may oras pa. And then pag pumunta po sila sa OWA, sa Polo, sa Embahada, wala po. Walang sumasagot. Kuminsan, pupunta doon yung OFW. Pag maganda-ganda ka pa, imbis na tutulungan ka, liligawan ka pa. Pero hindi na po nangyayari ngayon sa bagong administrasyon. And I commend Secretary Tutsople and of course Arnel Ignacio, yung admin ng OWA. They've been going around from one country to another, sa Saudi especially, para to ensure na talaga maayos yung kalagayan natin mga OFW. And I commend those people also, Yusek Kakdak. I've worked with him for so many years nung siya po'y nasa POA and OWA too. So we have 3 people who works hard. I would say a workaholic people in government. Si Tutsople, si Yusek Kakdak, and Arnel Ignacio. And I hope they'll keep doing what they're doing, because for me, they're doing a heck of a good job. But anyway, before I end, ito medyo off-topic ng konti. Bago ako umupo, para sa kabatiran ng lahat, magkaibigan kami ni beautiful Senator, intelligent Senator Loren Legarda. Kasi may kumakalat sa internet na parang pinag-aaway kami, na parang magkagalit daw kami ni Senator Loren Legarda. May mga clickbait doon. May mga picture na parang nag-aaway kami. Pero hindi totoo po yan. As a matter of fact, Senator Loren, mataas po masyadong respeto ko sa kanya. Mahal ko po si Senator Loren. And siyang favorite
Ano po
kong
yun?
senator.
Ano po yun? Mahal niyo si Senator Loren?
Mahal ko siya bilang isang
Okay.
colleague. Wag mo naman
Mahal
lagyan
ko
ng
rin
pun-
mahal ko rin po si Kong Jocelyn Tulfo.
Oh, di ba?
Opo.
Si
parang-
Senator Tulfo, hindi niyo mamahal?
Mahal ko at matalik na kaibigan.
Exactly. Yun. So para maliwanag lang, kasi maraming kumakalat sa social media, nakikita ko, pag tinitingnan ko parang nag-aaway kami ni Sen. Loren, hindi naman totoo. Clickbait lang. Pag pinupunta mo dun sa loob, hindi naman. Ang inaaway ko noon last time ay yung DOLE. Yun. Pero
Tama
hindi
po
kami
kayo.
nag-aaway ni Senator Loren.
I'm glad that, just so that it's clarified, because it's not just this representation. Meron pong mga katanungan, hindi lang si Senator Tulfo, ang iba-ibang senador po sa mga ahensya ng gobyerno. Para po maintindihan ng lahat na hindi po nasa Senado, bawal po diretsyong sumagot ang mga ahensya ng gobyerno, kaya po may chair at vice chair po ng mga komite. Kaya po sila ang sumasagot po yung chairman ng finance o mga vice chair. And I say this not for the colleagues in the Senate, but for those in this live stream, para po maintindihan ng taong bayan na nanonood po ng mga finance hearing noon. Pag pinapagtagol po ni Senator Angara bilang chairman ng finance ang mga ahensya ng gobyerno or ng higit sa 100 vice chair ng finance, ang agency ng government sa kanilang budget, hindi po ibig sabihin na sila'y sang-ayon sa lahat ng panahon sa mga ginagawa o hindi po ginagawa ng ahensya ng gobyerno, pero mandato po ng mga vice chair at ng chair ipaliwanag po ang budget. At yun po ang ibig sabihin ni Senator Tulfo. Siya po ay nagtatanong sa NLRC, National Labor Relations Commission, under the DOLE, at tayo po ang nagtatanggol ng dole budget. So thank you for that clarification. I'm a bit surprised that you mentioned it today because it was something we were discussing earlier before session start. But thank you for that clarification, Senator Tulfo.
At isa pa pala, Madam President, magsasalita akong tapos, hindi ako tatanggap ng posisyon bilang Vice Chair ng Finance. Kasi nga po, ang kinakatakutan ko pag ako naging Vice Chair Finance at pinadepensa sa akin ng isang agency na binabatikos ko, ano na mukha ko doon? Binabatikos ko dati and then later on, kakampihan ko na at i-depensa ko. Kaya hindi po ako pwede maging Vice Chair ng Finance dahil ayoko pong maisubo, akin pong i-depensa ang isang ehensya na halos karamihan sa mga ehensya ay binabatikos ko and then later on ay aking pagtatanggol. Kaya yung pagiging Vice Chair, wala na pong mangyari. Hindi po mapupunta sa akin yun. Maraming salamat po, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Tulfo. Based on the list given to me, Senator Revilla is supposed to interpolate, and then Senator Padilla, and I see the hand raised, our Deputy Minority Leader, Senator Risa Ontiveros, and I know that the Majority Leader will interpolate as well. And so we recognize Senator Ramon Revilla.
Junior. Thank you, Mr. President. With a heavy heart, allow me to share with the sorrow and exasperation of my good friend Senator Jinggoy and Senator Tulfo. Alam niyo po, talagang nakakalungkot, nakakagalit, nakakapanginig ng laman. Ilang ulit pa ba sa Kuwait na naman? Ilang buhay pa ang walang saysay na masasayang? Every life so mercilessly and violently taken is one life too many. We condemn this in the strongest terms. Bagong bayani, ganyan nating tawagin ang mga kababayan nating nagkakandakuba na sa pagtatrabaho ng maayos at marangal sa dayuhang bayan habang malayo sa kanilang mga mahal sa buhay. Pero sa lupit at karahasan sa mismong mga kamay ng mga kanilang pinagsisilbihan, nang maayos pa sila ay nakakaranas ng matinding pang-aabuso. Si Julie B. Ranara ay isa na namang buhay na nasayang. Pinatay, sinunog at tinapon sa disyerto na parang hayop. Maging sa kamatayan ay hindi binigyan ng dignidad. We do not tolerate this. We assure our countrymen that we will always stand as their protectors. Let this be a warning loud and clear, mga kababayan. May kasangga ang ating mga mahal na mga OFWs dito sa Senado. Hindi natin palalagpasin ang mga ganitong mga pangyayari. Managot ang dapat managot. Kaya siguro, Mr. President, one of these days, dalawin natin ang ating mga kababayan sa bawat lugar na yan at makausap talaga kung ano talaga mga kailangan pa nilang suporta na manggagaling sa atin. Again, sa inyo pong lahat, Mr. President, thank you very much po.
Maraming salamat
Thank you,
sa
Senator
aking kaibigan, aking kakosa sa kanyang sinabi. There is a nice suggestion coming from Senator Revilla that we tour or we inspect the polo offices in Saudi Arabia or in Kuwait or Qatar or even the United Arab Emirates to see para makita po ang kalagayan ng ating mga kababayang OFWs. I have been there several times, especially in the United Arab Emirates and also in Kuwait and in Qatar. I've visited the polo offices in their respective embassies, and I've saw within my two eyes, I have seen the condition of all our distressed overseas Filipino workers. Karamihan po kababaihan. And in fact, marami hong umiiyak, lalo na po sa Kuwait, tsaka sa Qatar, nung ako po ay pumunta ron, na nais po nilang umuwi
sa ating bansa para makapiling nila ang kanilang pamilya sapagkat marami po ron ay inabuso, minaltrato ng kanilang amo, binuntis ng kanilang amo. Ako naman po bilang tagapangulo ng Committee on Labor nung araw, nung ako po ay nasa Senado pa, ay naawa at sinama ko po ang siguro humigit kumulang na 20 distressed OFWs mula sa United Arab Emirates papunta dito sa ating bansa without any expense coming from our government. Yun lang po. Maraming salamat.
Thank you, Senator Estrada. Next to interpellate is Senator Robin Hood Padilla. Thank you.
Maraming salamat po, Ginang Pangulo. A'udhu billahi minasyaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. Bismillahi wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillahi. Mga mahal at ginagalang ko pong mga kasamahan dito sa Senado, ako po ay tumitindig sa pulpito na ito, kaisa ng ating mga kapwa Pilipino sa loob at labas ng bansa, upang ipaabot ang aking pakikipagdalamhati at pakikiramay sa ating nasawing kababayang OFW sa gitnang silangan. Nadurog po ang aking puso, ang ating mga puso, nang makita ko sa balita ang kalunos-lunos na sinapit ni Ginang Ranara. Walang buhay, puro latay, at sunog ang katawan na natagpuan sa isang disyerto sa bansang Kuwait. Mariin po natin kinukundina ang kriminalidad na ito. At kasama ni Senator Jinggoy Estrada, Senator Ramon Revilla Jr., Senator Rafi Tulfo, Senator Villanueva, ay nananawagan po ako sa lahat ng kaugnay ng ahensya sa gobyerno sa pamumuno ng Department of Migrant Workers na patuloy na kumilos para mapanagot ang may sala. Hindi po matatawaran ng anumang simpatya at pakikipagluksa ang pasakit na dinaranas ng pamilya ni Ginang Ranara. Ang ating nais pong ipaabot, kasama ng ating pagdamay sa kanila, ay ang pagsusog sa nararapat at mabilis na pagkamit ng hustisya para kay Ginang Ranara. At kasabay po nito, ang pagtiyak na wala ng sinuman sa higit 150,000 kababayan nating household domestic workers sa Kuwait ang mauuwi sa kalunos-lunos na sinapit ni Ginang Ranara. Ginang Tagapangulo, naniniwala po tayo na walang buhay ang nararapat makaranas ng kalapastanganan sa kamay ni numan. Hindi si Ginang Ranara, hindi sinuman. Kung kaya po tayo ay nananawagan sa bukas na pakikipagtulungan ng otoridad at opisyal ng Kuwait para sa mabilis na pagresolba ng kasong ito. Ako po ay lumalapit, nakikiusap, kumakatok sa pintuan ng ating mga kababayan para bigyan pong diin na ang sinapit ng ating bayaning OFW ay hindi po kailanman gawain ng isang Muslim. Hindi po ito parte ng aming pananampalataya. Ito po ay tahasang paglabag sa katuruan ng Islam. Nililinaw ko po ito sapagkat karamihan po ng nasa Kuwait ay kaisa po namin sa pananampalataya. Kasabay ng ating pakikiisa sa pagluluksa at pagsigaw ng hustisya para kay Ginang Ranara ay isa ring panawagan na naway hindi po matanim sa isip ng bawat isa na anumang uri ng karahasan ay bahagi po ng Islam. Lalo't higit na hindi po ito kailanman kasama sa doktrina ng Islam. Ang katunayan po, ang pagkitil po ng buhay sa Islam ay mahigpit pong pinagbabawal. Ang sinasabi po sa banal na Quran, ang pagpatay sa sinumang inosenteng tao ay katumbas ng pagkitil sa sangbuong sangkatauhan. Sa puntong ito, nais ko pong ipahayag ang aking intensyon upang maging bahagi ng pribilehiyong talumpati ng aking mahal at ginagalang at sinasaladuhang Ginoo mula sa San Juan, Senador Jinggoy Estrada. Muli po, ang aking pong buong pusong pakikiramay, pakikiisa sa pagkilos tungo sa hustisya para kay Ginang Ranara. Maraming salamat po, Ginang Tagapangulo.
Maraming salamat po sa aking kasamahan sa industriya ng pelikulang Pilipino, si Senator Revilla at si Senator Padilla sa inyong magandang panelta ukol sa aking privilege speech. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Senator Robin Padilla. We recognize Senator Risa Ontiveros.
Salamat po, Madam President. Hindi po ito interpellation. Nais ko pong mag-manifest ng suporta para sa privilege speech ng good gentleman mula sa San Juan. Taos puso po akong nakikiramay sa mga naulila ng ating kababayang si Julebi Ranara. Lalo na po yung nakita natin kanina sa photo na ipinakita ng good gentleman mula sa San Juan na ang ina at isa sa 4 na anak ni Julebi. At patuloy nating kinukondena ang mga insidenteng ito ng pang-aabuso at pagpatay pa sa ating mga kababayang nakikipagsapalaran sa Middle East. Nananawagan din ako sa Department of Migrant Workers at sa iba pang mga ahensya ng gobyerno na tutukang mabuti ang kalagayan ng ating mga kababayan sa Kuwait habang sila'y nagtatrabaho pa doon at lalo na kung, at wag na sana pong madagdagan, may sinapit na ganitong, sabi nga po ng good gentleman mula sa San Juan, napakapait na kapalaran. Sa Kuwait po, kung saan marami na palang naiulat na kaso ng pang-aabuso at pang-mamaltrato. Inuulit ko rin po, Madam President, good gentleman mula sa San Juan, ang ating consistent na panawagan sa pagtaguyod ng mga prinsipyo ng ILO Fair Recruitment Guidelines. Specifically po, Madam Chair, good gentleman mula sa San Juan, yung relevant po doon sa binanggit kong ILO Fair Recruitment Guidelines ay yung pong patungkol sa responsibilidad ng gobyerno. Binibigyang diin ko rin po, Madam President at good gentleman mula sa San Juan, na hindi sapat ang paghingi natin ng hustisya para kay Julebi. Ang tunay na hustisya ay kakabit ng ating masigasig na pagsiguro na mapoprotektahan ang ating mga kababayang nagtatrabaho malayo sa ating inang bayan. At ang pinakamahalaga sigurong magagawa natin para sa ating mga OFW ay ang pagsiguro natin na maging maayos ang ating ekonomiya upang wala nang mangibang bansa para lamang mabuhay ang kanilang pamilya. At huling punto po, Madam President, good gentleman mula sa San Juan, dahil nabanggit ko na rin po ang ILO kanina kaugnay ng fair recruitment policies nito at nabanggit din po ng good gentleman mula sa San Juan ang ILO Domestic Workers Convention number 189. Batid po natin, Madam President, good gentleman mula sa San Juan, na bukas lamang ay idadaos ang ILO High-Level Mission Legislators Meeting. Kung hindi po ako nagkakamali sa pamumuno mismo ng ating Senate President. At hari nawa, mapag-usapan po dyan sa high-level legislators meeting ng International Labor Organization itong iba't ibang mahalagang issue ni raise po ng good gentleman mula sa San Juan, partikular po sa pang-aabuso at pagpatay kay Julebi Ranara at yung iba pa pong nakakabit na mga issue sa usapin ng karapatan at kagalingan ng ating mga OFWs. Salamat po, Madam President, Mr. President, at mabuhay, good gentleman mula sa San Juan.
Maraming salamat sa aking kaibigan, Deputy Minority Floor Leader. At ako po ay sumasang-ayon sa lahat po ng sinabi ng ating Deputy Minority Floor Leader. Maraming salamat po.
Mr. President,
Yes,
if
Majority
I may
Leader.
be recognized and ask some questions, Mr. President, if I may, with the permission of our distinguished colleague, Senator Estrada.
The Majority Leader is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the onset, may I put on record my sincerest thanks and gratitude to our dear colleague, the chairperson of the Committee on Labor, which I used to chair, Mr. President, for the past 6 years. Let me also take this opportunity once again to condemn strongly the brutal killing of the 35-year-old kababayan natin, si Julie B., isang domestic worker in Kuwait na umalis ng bansa natin para lamang magbigay ng magandang kinabukasan, masuportahan ng kanyang mga mahal sa buhay, lalo na yung kanyang 4 na minor na anak when she left the country for work. Ngunit hindi lang kayamanan ang nanakaw sa kanya, hindi lamang dignidad, kung hindi mismong buhay, Ginoong Pangulo, ang nanakaw sa kanya in a most horrific way, Mr. President. Mr. President, we can no longer claim what happened to Julie B. was an isolated case. I'm sorry to say that, but this is not an isolated case. In 2018, Mr. President, the body of Joanna Demafilis was found stuffed in a freezer, again in Kuwait, Mr. President. Chinap-chap po yung katawan niya. Nakita natin yung kababayan natin nasa freezer. In 2019, si Constancia Lago Dayag died in a hospital in Kuwait after being beaten and sexually abused by her employer. Si Dayag po, Ginoong Pangulo, yung kababayan natin nakitaan ng cucumber sa kanyang genitals, Mr. President. Again in Kuwait. In the same year, Mr. President, Jenaline Padernal Villavende was assaulted by her employer for days and was imprisoned in her room until her death. Nabalitaan natin to, Ginoong Pangulo. Si Villavende asked for help sa kanyang recruitment agency. She asked for help. Pero wala hong tumugon sa kanyang paghingi ng tulong. Binulabog po tayo noong nabalitaan na lamang natin siya isang malamig ng bangkay. Yun na yung huling balita natin, patayin na lang ho siya. Again, Mr. President, ito pong mga bagay na ito, lahat po ng instances na ito, dininig natin dito sa Senado. And that made us, prompted us in the committee to come up with solutions, including that bilateral agreement that we need to make sure is being respected by the host country. Mr. President, how many more Filipinas have to suffer before we put a stop to this abuse? We're calling for the government and the Department of Migrant Workers to look into the possibility of a deployment ban until we can be assured of the safety of our migrant workers. And that would be my first question, Mr. President. Ang ating colleague, dear colleague, Senator Jinggoy Estrada, has also been the chairperson of the Committee on Labor for quite some time. That's why it's a big shoes to fill in, distinguished colleague, when I took over your post. But I wanted to ask, Mr. President, because in the Migrant Workers Act, yung pong RA 8042, dun sa Section 4 na inamyendahan ng RA 10022, it requires that Filipinos may only be deployed to countries, one, that have existing labor and social laws protecting the rights of workers, including migrant workers. Two, or are signatories to and or ratifiers of multilateral conventions, declarations, or resolutions relating to the protection of workers, including migrant workers. And last but not the least, that have concluded bilateral or arrangements with the government on the protection of the rights of OFW. So yung unang tanong ko, Ginoong Pangulo, sa experience ng ating distinguished colleague, ito ba ay nangangailangan or ito po ba ay kailangan tignan ulit natin, pag-aralan muli kung kinakailangang ibalik yung tinatawag na deployment ban na Ginoong Pangulo?
Sa aking palagay, Ginoong Pangulo, ay kinakailangan ibalik yung deployment ban dito sa bansang Kuwait sapagkat sa lahat mga nabanggit niyong mga pumanaw na ating mga kababayan, hindi lamang po si Villavendi, hindi lamang po si Dimafilis, kundi bago po sila namatay, marami pa hong naunang namatay. Katulad nitong si Lizelle Hukdong, Vanessa Carisha Esguera, Maria Fe Saliling Librada, Arlene Castillo Manzano, Divine Richie Encarnacion, Patrick Sunga, at Myra Luna Huntilla. Marami pa nitong 2018 pa lang, marami na hong ating mga OFWs ang pumanaw, at itong mga nabanggit kong pangalan, hindi ko po alam kung paano sila namatay at hindi ko alam yung kanilang cause of death. Ito lang yung aking mga datos na nakalap mula sa Department of Migrant Workers. At isa sa aking nakita rito sa briefer ng Department of Migrant Workers ay ang bansang Kuwait ay hindi po signatory ng ILO Convention number 189, yung tinatawag na Domestic Workers Convention of 2011. Ngunit tayo po, ang Pilipinas po, ay isa sa mga signatory ng convention which was ratified on September 5, 2012.
Maraming salamat, Ginoong Pangulo, at dun sa tugon po ninyo na marapat lamang, hindi lang pag-aralan, kundi, if I'm not mistaken, you are saying that we have to not just consider, but implement deployment ban as of this time.
If I may add, Mr. President.
Yes, please.
If I may add.
Yes, please.
Last February 12, 2018, there was a total ban,
Yes.
okay, by the Department of Labor. It was contained in an Administrative Order number 54 series of 2018 because of the death of Joanna Dimafilis. And the deployment ban was lifted several months after, on May 25, 2018, because of the agreement on employment of domestic workers with the state of Kuwait, and was signed by the then Secretary and our colleague right now, Senator Alan Peter Cayetano, on May 11, 2018. And I also have the copy of the agreement between between the government of the Philippines and the government of Kuwait. And on January 3, 2020, there was another resolution coming from the POEA Governing Board, a resolution number 1, deployment ban for newly hired domestic workers or household service workers. And on January 15, a total deployment ban except for skilled workers and professional who are categorized as balik manggagawa. And again, in February 6, 2020, the deployment ban was lifted except for newly hired and returning domestic workers or household service workers. And again, on February 13, the deployment ban was lifted and resumed processing and deployment of all remaining categories of domestic workers and household service workers. Yun lamang po.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, for that very important information conveyed to us by our dear colleague, the chairperson of the Committee on Labor. And I support him. I believe in his competency to call on this, Mr. President. Let me just ask another question, considering na yung binanggit po ninyo, Ginoong Pangulo, parang flip-flopping. Ibaban, ipapasok uli. Ibaban, ililift uli. May deployment ban, ililift uli. Nung nilift po yung ban nung 2018, it is because of the Memorandum of Understanding with Kuwait that guarantees, among others, nakita ko po yung MOU na ito. Nakalagay po dito na yung mga passports ng mga kababayan natin ay hindi kinukumpiska by their employers na kabaligtaran dun sa kafala system, and that they are provided with food, housing, clothing, and to be registered with the health insurance system of Kuwait. Meron din access ang gobyerno sa kanila para malaman kung ano ang estado nila 24/7, malaman kung nasaan sila at ano ang kanilang ginagawa. Ngunit, Ginoong Pangulo, this was signed May 11, 2018. And if I'm not mistaken, ang span of this particular will only until 4 years, Mr. President. So if I'm not mistaken, nag-expire na po ito, Ginoong Pangulo. If I'm not mistaken, is that correct? At kung nag-expire po ito, hindi ba dapat kung nag-expire ito, dapat kaalinsunod dun sa expiration? Una, dapat meron bago or ma-renew man lang ito para masigurong protektado ang ating mga kababayan. Pangalawa, hindi pa ito na-expire, dapat ginagawa na ng ating mga representatives in the government na masiguro na tuloy-tuloy yung proteksyon ng ating mga kababayan. So, ang next question ko din po is that dahil po ba dito kung bakit
Nag-flip-flop.
yes, nag-flip-flop?
Well, wala po akong sagot sa inyong katanungan. Nakita ko lang po sa lahat ng mga datos na ibinigay po, isinubmit sa akin ng Department of Migrant Workers. Hindi, yung isa. Sapagkat tuwing meron lang pumapanaw na ating mga kababayan, doon sila magde-deploy ng ban. Pag medyo okay na, ililift ka agad. Kaya hindi ko po malaman kung ano po ang rationale ng mga otoridad natin kung bakit flip-flopping lagi ang kanilang nagiging desisyon. At tungkol naman doon sa pinirmahan ng ating gobyerno, represented by then Secretary Alan Peter Cayetano and the government of Kuwait. Nag-expire na po ito 4 years, no? Tama po yung sinabi ninyo at nakalagay din po sa kanilang agreement, if I am not mistaken, the agreement was signed, shall remain in force and effect for a period of 4 years and shall be renewed automatically unless either party notifies in writing through the diplomatic channels of its desire to terminate or suspend this agreement 6 months prior to the ending of its validity.
So would we know if this is still in effect? Because
I-
it says automatically unless...
I think we will still have to ask the Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I think this is a very good opportunity now to discuss policy, Mr. President, as made mention by our chairperson of the Committee on Labor. For example, Mr. President, if there are any studies on the impact of these bilateral agreements on the number of cases and general state of working conditions of our kababayan, especially, for example, in Kuwait. Nung mangyari po ba ito, bumaba talaga. Kasi kung ganun, dapat pagpatuloy natin ito at kung ito naman ay may pagkukulang, dapat punan natin at bilang mga mambabatas at policy makers, we are here to listen, Mr. President. Just a suggestion, especially as we tackle this particular issue, Mr. President. Because another question is that our MOU still use is total ban advisable. Kasi titingnan natin yung polisiya natin ngayon, yung ating present situation, in case a country is non-compliant, do you still allow the deployment of OFWs in this area? If yes, what exceptional cases would warrant the deployment of OFWs in these areas? Because I remember, Mr. President, hindi nga nasa non-compliant category noon ang Kuwait, nasa partially compliant sila, ngunit nung pumasok po tayo dito sa agreement na ito, itong MOU na binabanggit ng ating distinguished colleague, signed in May 11, 2018, na-lift po yung ban. So again, may we know, Mr. President, the thoughts of our chairperson of the Committee on Labor as to when do we really come up with decision na ito, non-compliant, automatic. we institute deployment ban. Kung partially compliant naman, ano yung exemption? At pwede nating sabihin, okay, pwede pa rin tayong magpadala ng ating mga kababayan sapagkat safe sila at kaya pa rin natin silang protektahan.
Maraming salamat, Ginoong Pangulo. Doon po sa sinasabi niyong non-compliant host countries, na kung saan ipadala natin yung ating mga OFWs, para sa akin po, dapat hindi na po tayo magpapadala ng ating mga OFWs doon sa mga non-compliant host countries. Dahil, unang-una, isusubo mo ang buhay ng ating mga OFWs kung hindi naman compliant sa ating mga labor laws yung host countries. Pangalawa, dun sa partially compliant, pag-aaralan muna natin, we have to study it thoroughly before deploying our OFWs to their respective host countries where they want to work. At ako nanggigigil ako rito sa bansang Kuwait sapagkat sa dami kong nababalitaan, and it is also recorded, marami na ho talagang pang-aabuso na ginagawa itong mga amo nitong ating mga OFWs. That's why I want to recommend to the Department of Migrant Workers to ban our OFWs from working in the state of Kuwait.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me share the sentiment of our distinguished colleague na unless there is hindi sila compliant, dapat ban talaga. Kung partially compliant, meron ding safeguards, additional safeguards to ensure the protection of our OFWs. Last question na lang po, Ginoong Pangulo, if we have some data as to what other countries or what are the countries where there is a significant number of cases of OFW exploitation and abuse. You made mention a while ago, Mr. President, na itong bansang Kuwait mukhang lagi nang nakakaisa sa atin, sa ating mga kababayan. No? May mga ilang bansa po ba na significant po yung number of cases of OFW exploitation and abuse? At ano po, what are the professions or work of the OFWs that are usually involved in these cases? I asked this question, Mr. President, because we wanted to find out if indeed there is some sort of correlation between the categorization of a country as a compliant, partially compliant, non-compliant, with the number of cases of abuses suffered by our OFWs. And if the answer is yes, then yun nga po, no, why are we still allowing our kababayans to go to these areas? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Doon po sa inyong katanungan, I will just give you a brief background dito sa aking mga datos na nakalap mula sa Department of Migrant Workers. Meron po tayong kabuuan na 1,825,000 OFWs and 5.9% are deployed in Kuwait. Okay? In Saudi Arabia, we have 24.4%. And in United Arab Emirates, we have 14.4%. In Hong Kong, we have 6.7%. Kuwait, again, 5.9%. Singapore, we have 5.8%. Qatar, we have 4.8%. Other countries in Asia, we have 16.3%. In Europe, we have 9.3%. In North and South America, we have 8.9%. In Australia, we have 2.2%, and in Africa, we have 1.3%. And according to the report coming from the OWA, as of October 17 of 2022, there are 6,035 cases of maltreatment and mistreatment in the Middle East. Wow. While there are only 679 cases in Asia, Europe, and the Americas combined. Yun lang po ang aking datos na nakalap. I cannot be specific in the figures. I cannot give you the specific figures right now. But if you insist on me giving you the specific figures, I will call the attention of the agencies concerned.
Thank you, distinguished colleague. Marami pong salamat. I would just like to state for the record as well that the last time I had this data that the gentleman from San Juan is talking about was December 2020 of January pa, Mr. President. Ang December 2020, ng January to December 2020, 6,035 din po yung maltreatment and mistreatment mula sa Middle East. So parang after...
Parang di nagbago.
Hindi ho nagbago, Mr. President. Kaya ko ho tinatanong yan para maibangga natin yung mga data natin, kung ano pa yung mga pupwede natin gawin, bakit hindi nagbago yung maltreatment at mistreatment, 6,035, contract violation, Middle East din po ito, 9,647, contract substitution, 2,550, sexual abuse, harassment, 444, rape cases, 77, lahat po ito sa Middle East. So again, Mr. President, maraming salamat sa ating kaibigan at chairperson ng Committee on Labor, Senator Jinggoy Estrada, and please rest assured that this representation will support you all the way in finding the solution, not only, Mr. President, of protecting our OFWs, but ensuring, Mr. President, that the things that we do here in the Senate ay nai-implement ng maayos at again, nakakalungkot man isipin, parang taon-taon na lang lagi natin sinasabi, sana hindi na mangyari yung mga nangyayaring ganito. Maraming salamat, Ginoong Pangulo. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Mr. President. Just to add, I'm just a bit surprised with the revelation of the Majority Floor Leader that the data that he has right now, that was 2020, is still the same as the data of 2022. 6,035 cases of maltreatment and mistreatment in the Middle East. Hindi gumalaw. Mukha yata, imposible yata yon. And we have to call the attention of the government agencies concerned. Na, bakit pareho? Hindi yata gumalaw ang numero for 2 years. Imposible naman. Pataas ang kaso ng mga inaabuso ng ating mga OFWs. Maraming namamatay. Bakit pareho pa rin ang figures? And I think that is a major concern as far as I am concerned. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. President, at this juncture, move that we recognize our Senate President Pro Tempore, Senator Lauren Legarda. So move, Mr. President.
Our distinguished Senate President Pro Tempore is recognized, Senator Lauren Legarda.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ako po'y nakikiisa kay Senator Jinggoy Estrada at ang ating mga kasamahan sa pagpahayag ng galit at puot at kalungkutan sa nangyari po sa ating isang domestic helper sa Kuwait na alam natin hindi unang insidente o unang beses ng kamatayan o karahasan ang nakamit habang naghahanap ng ikabubuhay sa ibang bansa. Simple lang pong aking mga katanungan kay Senator Estrada. Alam natin na higit sa 200,000, di ba? 240,000 actually ang mga OFWs sa Kuwait. Is that correct? 240,000?
I think it's less than 200, around 170.
Okay. So not 240,000. Maybe this is in another jurisdiction. Do we have a DMW officer since it's a new law? Meron ba tayo sa Kuwait na naitatag na opisina ng domestic DMW office?
Madam President, thank you, Mr.
Yes.
President. Right now, I am not aware if they
Wala
have
pa.
already
Baka wala pa.
put up an office in the respective embassies.
Okay. Ito pong pagkamatay at nagkaroon pala ng warning si Julie B. at malupit na sa kanya yung anak ng kanyang amo. Sino kaya ang pwede niyang tinawagan sana mula sa ating embahada ng Kuwait kung hindi pa naka-establish ang DMW office doon?
Kung meron po tayong, katulad na po na sinabi nyo, kung meron po tayong hotline number, na binanggit din po ni Senator Tulfo, pwede po siyang tumawag dun sa hotline number na yun. Ngunit nung tinawagan po ni Senator Tulfo yung hotline number kanina, mukha yatang walang sumasagot. Pero dito, meron akong nakalap na pwedeng tumawag sa ating embahada dun sa Kuwait. Meron pong number na binigay. Ang number nito ay purely for the assistance to nationals concerns.
ATN, okay.
Okay.
So meron pong
number.
ATN number sa
Yes.
embahada ng Kuwait na maaring tinawagan pero baka hindi siyempre alam ng ating mga domestic workers doon or overseas Filipinos, lalo na sa Kuwait, baka hindi napapalaganap
Yes, dapat yun.
ang impormasyon na yun.
Ang suggestion ko po dyan, Ginoong Pangulo, ay bago po sana umalis ang ating mga kababayan papunta ron sa bansang Kuwait, ay siguro dapat binigyan po ng briefing or orientation at binigay po yung kaukulang mga importanteng mga telephone numbers kung sasakaling magipit sila, kung ano man ang mangyari sa kanila, meron po silang matatawagan.
Sa kaso po ni Julie B., ilang buwan na po siyang under the employ of the parents of the perpetrator of the crime?
Well, wait.
Matagal na pa po siya doon o ilang buwan pa lang?
Anim na.
6 na buwan.
6 na buwan lang po.
At itong isang 17-year-old ang siyang nagbigay ng threats at siya po ay nagpahayag pa. Kanino po siya nagpahayag? Ng
Sa
kanilang,
kanyang kapatid po.
sa kanyang kapatid.
Inamin niya ang karumal-dumal na pagpatay sa ating kababayan.
At dahil nangyari po yung krimen na yun, ang tingin ko po ay hindi po nila alam kung saan sila lalapit or kanino tatawag. Otherwise, they would have asked for help, right?
No, the brother, according to the report coming from the DMWD, reported it to the police.
To the local police.
Yeah, to the local police
In
of
Kuwait.
Kuwait.
Was it acted
When
on?
the perpetrator or the suspect admitted to his brother that he was the one who killed Julie B.
So it was, they went to the police
Reported to the police
after the crime was...
after the crime.
Okay. But during the days before that there were threats to her life, that she conveyed these threats to
To
her
her family.
family, no action was taken by the local authorities or whether police in Kuwait or even the Philippine embassy there, because in the absence of a DMW officer, we have the POLO officers that should address the concerns of our migrant workers.
I do not think there was an action taken by any authorities of Kuwait, since Julie B just reported the maltreatment to her
To
family.
her family. And her family did not have access
I don't think her
or-
family did not have
Yes.
access to the authorities in Kuwait, or even our authorities here
Yes.
in the Philippines.
Would you agree, Mr. President, distinguished sponsor, that for at least countries where we deploy our domestic helpers who in the past, based on our historical knowledge and statistics of the DOLE, of the DMW, of OWA, have had problems with their employers, that we must have a special arrangement for one hotline, easy access, 24/7, and action, not call center type that you would have to go through OWA in the Philippines and a call center agent recorded message would answer, but to each his own. Ibig sabihin po, pag sa Kuwait, sa mga bansa na marami pong domestic helpers na dinedeploy ang Pilipinas, na meron po at least isa ng panggagahasa, pinatay, abuso, na may history ang bansang yan. Isa lang na Pilipinong inabuso ay sana yung ating konsulado and or embahada doon ay merong special hotline and programs and activities na pwedeng tawagan, puntahan, emergency number, depending on the country. Don't you agree, Mr.
Yes.
President?
Maraming salamat, Ginoong Pangulo. I totally agree with you, the gentlewoman from Antique. Dapat magkaroon talaga ng hotline, hindi lamang sa Kuwait, hindi lamang sa Saudi Arabia. Kasi sa Saudi Arabia, napakalaking bansa niyan. Meron tayong mga OFWs sa Riyadh, kailangan magka-hotline sa Riyadh. Meron tayong mga OFWs sa Jeddah, kailangan din magkaroon ng hotline sa Jeddah. Meron din tayong mga OFWs sa Bahrain, kailangan din magkaroon ng isang hotline dun sa mga nasabi
Yes.
kong mga key cities,
Yes.
key cities ng Saudi Arabia. Ganon din, katulad din ng iba't ibang bansa kung saan marami tayong mga OFWs, Hong Kong, Singapore, United Arab Emirates, sa Qatar, marami ho tayo dyan mga OFWs. Kailangan talaga, ako po'y lubos na sumasang-ayon sa inyong suggestion na makapaglagay ng hotline sa bawat bansa, hindi lang bawat bansa, kundi bawat syudad ng
Yes.
host countries.
Thank you for agreeing. At kayo ba ho ay sumasang-ayon na yung OWA hotline, kanina na ang sumasagot ay recorded message, ay hindi sapat, and to be able to address this concern na paulit-ulit na ilang taon at dekada na may mga pinapatay, ginagahasa, inaabuso ng mga Pilipino, mostly domestic helpers, sa iba't ibang bansa, sa Middle East usually, pero hindi lang sa Middle East minsan, sa ibang mga lugar, ay depende sa need at depende sa kultura at depende sa frequency ng mga nabiktima doon. Meron naman historical knowledge at statistika ang mga ahensya natin at ang mga embahada ay gumawa sila ng programa na gaya ng binanggit ni Senator Raffy Tulfo ay merong hindi lamang hotline o pag tumawag at may sumagot na taga-embahada, anong gagawin niya? Dapat may program of action for immediate action, and that hotline must be accessible, not a call center but a warm body who knows what to do at that immediate time. Because if there is such a thing, Mr. President, nung pinahayag na ni Julie B. ang kanyang pagkakamaltrato sa pamilya ng kanyang employer, ay sana napuntahan na niya o naabisuhan siya ng kanyang kapatid at nakupkup na po siya sa isang shelter or mismong sa ating embahada. Di ba po, kung handa ang ating embahada sa kaganitong kaganapan at walang dahilan na sila'y hindi handa dahil alam naman natin hindi po to ang kauna-unahang beses na merong inabuso, pinatay o ginahasa at ganitong nangyari sa bansang Kuwait. Di ba po? Dapat handa at alam ng ating konsulado, ambahador at mga domestic at polo offices doon at wag isisisi na hindi nila trabaho ito dahil nagsaset up pa lang ang DMW na bagong institusyon. Is that correct, Mr.
Yes, you are totally
President?
correct, and I totally would agree with all what you said. And I still have one suggestion. I want to talk to all labor attachés stationed in abroad, especially those in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, in Qatar, in all Middle East countries, para malaman natin kung ano ang pwede nilang gawin.
Yes.
Makaagarang aksyon. Kung meron katulad niyan nangyari kay Julie katulad nangyari kay Villavendi, kay Dimafiles, kung ano talaga ang pwede nilang gawin agad-agad. Anong solusyon ang pwede nilang gawin agad-agad. Kaya gusto ko pong makausap ang lahat ng mga labor attachés, kung meron pang labor attachés yun. I don't know kung na-abolish na yung...
There are still.
Meron
Meron pa po dahil
there
hindi
are still
naman... Yes.
labor attachés stationed in the host countries in the Middle East. I really would want to hold a dialogue and to explain to us kung ano po talaga ang magagawa nila just to save the lives of our OFWs.
I would join you in a resolution and a hearing because all these speeches and giving burial assistance and kabuhayan assistance to the deceased family, while these are laudable moves showing our sympathy, will not stop the abuse on our overseas Filipinos if our manner of solving it will be response-oriented. So I would seek the guidance of the chair of the committee and your honor as well, so that that consultation with the labor officials as well as those that have migrant workers officials already in this country would be able to tell us. But actually, simple lang po eh. Magkaroon nga, sinabi po ni Senator Tulfo, kung nalaman niya, kaya niyang aksyonan. Kung kaya yan ng isang senador, kaya naman siguro with all the millions of resources that we give our government agencies, that every jurisdiction where there are Filipinos who serve as domestic helpers, who are sometimes prone to be victims of psychologically ill employers, would have a place, a number to call, a place to run to at any one time they fear for their lives. Simple lang po yan. I don't think it would take millions of augmentation in the budget. Trabaho po nila yan na alamin at trabaho nila para bigyan ng maraming assistance ang ating mga Pilipino naghihirap doon na maaring hindi alam ang kanilang pinapasok dahil na lang sa kahirapan sa ating bansa. Mr. President, ILO 189 was ratified during my time, I believe, as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. And this ILO Convention 189 is the International Labor Convention on Decent Work for Domestic Helpers. Of course, I'm proud that I was able to sponsor it, but all this ink on paper, going through the process of ratification of conventions, if it's not implemented and operationalized and our kababayans are still being raped and killed and abused, then what are we ratifying conventions? In fact, which brings me to my next question. Is Kuwait a signatory to ILO 189, and do they have the implementing legislation in their country so that their people can be educated on how to treat decent human beings?
Kuwait is not a signatory of the ILO Convention.
Okay. Now, is it not worth looking into that we deploy our workers in countries that have ratified such conventions to show their appreciation and recognition of the rights and, as it says, decent work for domestic helpers? So Kuwait is not
A signatory.
party to
Yes.
this agreement.
Yes.
Yes.
That's why I suggest to our government agencies concerned, like the OWA, not to deploy OFWs to countries who are not signatories of the ILO Convention.
I agree. In fact, Mr. President, 189 we already concurred in. There is ILO Convention 190 for ratification, and this is the Convention on Violence and Harassment in the Workforce. So aside from 189, which some of us were already here. I was chairman of Foreign Relations, I think 2015, when I sponsored that. We unanimously concurred in the ratification of 189. That is for decent work. Now, for 190, that is for protecting our kababayans against any form of harassment in the workplace and violence. I don't think the Philippines has completed the process of ratification. So my question is, are we at all a signatory? And if we are not, we should be a signatory. And if we have not ratified it, where is it? In the DFA, in the Office of the President, transmitted to the Senate, or is it in the Senate already in the archives and not yet heard? We must know, because this convention is important. First, 189, decent work. Now, protection against violence and harassment in the workforce. We must ratify this immediately, if not yet ratified. Maybe I am not informed that we have ratified it, but I do not remember having concurred in 190.
Kailan ba nangyari? Well, I am not aware if we have already ratified the ILO Convention number 190. Mr. President, our Deputy Minority Leader maybe has something to share
Senator
with
Risa
us.
is recognized.
Salamat kaayo, Mr. President, with the indulgence of the good gentleman from San Juan and the gentle lady from Antique. Thank you so much, Mr. President, for the gentlewoman's very passionate questioning and the good gentleman's interested response about ILO Convention 190. In fact, Mr. President, ILO Convention 190 is up for ratification by our Senate. And I hope that our labor movement partners who are advocating, who are campaigning to us here in the Senate for its ratification. I think we have clear signals of the support and the interest, the openness of at least two of our colleagues already. And may I add my voice to this, Mr. President, that I am hopeful with the positive action of the Senate previously on ILO Convention 151, also as the good gentlewoman from Antique mentioned earlier, ILO Convention 189, na maasahan po ng ating mga kababayang manggagawa ang agaran din at positibong aksyon ng Senado sa pagratipika ng ILO Convention 190. Daghang salamat, Mr. President. Good job,
Just for the information of the two ladies, senators, according to our secretariat, they have not transmitted to us yet the
So wala pa. It's not
ILO.
here.
It has not been transmitted. Similar to what happened to the RCEP, I was asking the sponsor to sponsor the convention or the treaty, but it was only recently submitted to the Senate. With this case, with ILO 190, wala pa.
I sadly stand corrected then, Mr. President, but hope that the relevant government bodies will take the necessary step para madagdagan po ng Senado ang historically positive actions natin sa ganitong mga importanteng kumbensyon. Salamat
Absolutely.
kayo sa liwat, Mr. President.
I appreciate the Senate President's intervention and given the clarification. I appreciate as well the information given by the Deputy Minority Leader. I am one with you, with a good sponsor in supporting the ratification, the concurrence in the ratification of ILO 190, having, as I said, sponsored the convention before that in 2015, which is the 189 for decent work. This is 190 is against harassment and violence in the workplace. But again, all these conventions and ratifications, treaties, etc., will be to naught. Baliwala po ang ating mga salita at pagpirma kung hindi po natin binibigyan ng ngipin ang mga batas at ang mga konbensyon na ito. Kaya ang simple pong hinihiling po natin sa DFA, sa DOLE, sa DMW, sa mga polo, ay magtatag ng hotline hindi bukas ngayon na simple po. Kung wala silang polo at walang DMW, maski sa konsul, maski sinong tao sa embahada na maaring tawagan ng distressed OFWs. I will repeat, hindi siguro po minurder si Julie B. kung pinahayag po niya sa kanyang kamag-anak ang mga maltrato sa kanya, kung meron po silang alam na numerong tatawagan at nasagip po si Julie P. ng maaga. So, marami po sanang buhay na masasagip kung maayos po ang ating pamahalaan. Hindi lamang ngayon sa mga nakaraang taon at nakaraang dekada na paulit-ulit ng ganito, kabaong umuuwi. Tapos, it's just exasperating and sometimes frustrating what our embassies, consulates, polo, DMW, with different names of our institutions working overseas. But if you could not save the life of one woman and many others before her, then we are remiss in our duties.
Yes, lady Senator from Panay, Senator Ontiveros is recognized.
Salamat kaayo, Mr. President. Once more, with the indulgence of the good gentleman from San Juan and the gentle lady from Antique, para lang kumpletuhin yung impormasyon kaugnay ng ILO Convention 190, gaya ng tamang ikinorekt ng presiding officer kanina, kasalukuyan nasa kamay pa po ng DFA at ng DOLE para i-transmit na po sana hanggat maaga dito sa Senado. At kaugnay po niyan, Mr. President, sumulat na po itong representasyon ng sulat sa ating colleague at kabarong senador na chair ng Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, si Sen. Aimee, na kung maaari kapag na-transmit na ito ng dalawang kagawaran, ay sana maaga pong maaksyonan ito at ng positibo ng ating kapulungan. Salamat kayo sa liwat, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
Yes, I'd like to also advise the Secretariat, through our Senate Secretary, to inform the PLLO that they should double time their work, particularly on the treaties that we need to pass for this year, this next year, particularly the ILO 190. I think that's the reason why we need, after this speech, Your Honors, this has to be referred to the proper committee so that you can investigate further and ask the government agencies why are they delayed in the transmittal, for example, on the ratification of this treaty, and what have they done in order to prevent such actions from taking place to this lady, unfortunate incident, no, si Miss Julie B?
Yes.
Julie B. Ranao.
Mr. President, I'm glad that you mentioned it, and I'm grateful to you for instructing the Secretariat to follow up with the government agencies. You're being proactive, and I truly commend you for that. Mr. President, this may not be the same subject matter as 190, but it's similar because it's a UNESCO agreement that was signed in 2005, believe it or not. It's still not in the Senate, and the agencies of government are still studying it. And this is the UNESCO heritage that will provide incentives to conservation of heritage, investments in the creative industries, in film, etc. And the French ambassador had mentioned it to us.
Yes.
It's still being studied. 205 pa po, 2020 na. So we ask, there should be a PLLO, knowledgeable staff sitting there every day, so that it is not just our secretariat, but the legislative office must be embedded in the Senate, whether online or here, so that they know what we're discussing, so that they can follow up with government agencies, and there should be no missing link or time lost, because every minute is urgent, especially when it comes to the concurrence and ratification of important conventions and treaties, Mr. President.
I absolutely agree with the lady senator from Antique and the Republic of the Philippines, and it shall be ordered that
Thank
we'll
you.
ask the PLLO to report to us immediately.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is our earnest request that the PLLO must know all the hearings being conducted, all the resolutions being heard, and everything being taken up in plenary, so that at any time they can call the government agency that is lagging behind in their knowledge or importance of their concurrence in those measures. We understand the difficult work of the executive, but it's also important that institutions of government speak to each other so that we can serve our people better. I thank the Senate President for being proactive in this regard and many more things. And I'm grateful to Senator Estrada for bringing this to the floor today. Nakakalungkot, nakakasakit sa ating lahat. At ako'y nagagalak po na marami tayong kakampi, tayong lahat, na pagbibigay ng tulong kung paano bigyan ng solusyon. Hindi lamang ang pamilya ni Jollibee, kung marami pang kamukha nila na hindi alam saan tatawag, saan pupunta para bigyan ng solusyon ang kanilang mga lulungkot na buhay. Thank you very much, Senator Estrada, for patiently answering my queries. Thank you to our colleagues as well. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
President.
You. And I think that's the reason why we passed last year the department, or last Congress, the Department of Migrant Workers that was sponsored by our majority floor leader. It's really to address and finally put an end to all the difficulties of our overseas Filipino workers. Of course, they can always claim that it's in the infancy stage. We just created the agency. But I hope that this be an eye-opener for the new agency, for the department, to really take to task their role to help our OFWs all around the world. That's why we made a special department for them. Sometimes under the objections of the mother department, the Department of Labor, sabi niya, kaya na nila. But because we wanted to prioritize overseas Filipino workers, we created a new department. I hope they can do their job effectively and efficiently in the months to come. So, yes, Senator Estrada.
Just to give an additional update with regard to ILO Convention number 190, we have there, as we speak, there are 24 countries who already signed the ILO Convention number 190, and the Philippines is not included in the list. So we have 24 countries that have signed the ILO Convention number 190. Thank you.
Maraming salamat, Senator Estrada, for the information. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Jinggoy Estrada. Mr. President, with that, I move that we refer the privileged speech of Senator Jinggoy Estrada and the manifestations, interpellations to the Committee on Migrant Workers as the primary committee and Committee on Foreign Relations as secondary committee. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion is approved.
Mr. President, at this juncture, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journals of the 28th session, November 8, 9, 10, 14, 15, 16, and 17, 2022, and 40th session, January 23, 2023, and consider them as approved.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, January 25, 2023.
There being no objection to the motion of our distinguished majority floor leader,
Session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, January 25, 2023. Have a pleasant good evening, everyone.